Chapter 721. Ding Nan killed Sun Cheng in an instant. The cultivators on the scene could not react for a while, especially when Ding Nan did not take out her powerful magical weapon. She was even muttering her opponent's name in a low voice, so they thought that Ding Nan had used some amazing magic. You almost there. After a short period of silence, the Taoist priests in gray robes roared angrily, and each took out their own powerful magical weapons. The cultivators of the Jingyi school also did not want to be outdone, and took out all kinds of powerful magical weapons. For a moment, the flames of war on Mount Longhu were about to start again. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were in the crowd, also found Ding Nan at this time. Deng Yu pulled her sister curiously, pointed at Ding Nan and said, "Sister, look, it seems to be Zhou Qin's follower. Her name is Ding Nan, isn't it?" Deng Jiao also widened her eyes and said curiously, "That seems to be the case. It's so strange. How did she become the leader of the Yin-Yang sect in Mount Wuhua?" Deng Yu was silent for a moment. Then she sighed softly and said, "Sister, haven't we also become the sword souls of Mount Longhu?" For a moment, the two sisters looked at each other and sighed. At such a young age, many things remained the same, but the people had changed, and great changes had occurred in their hearts. Zhang Ling, who was not far away from them, did not know what the sisters were thinking. She glared at the gray-robed cultivators in front of her and shouted sternly, "Yin Kong, no matter what, you are still a member of our Jingyi school. We are all of the same origin. Why are we fighting today?" A middle-aged Taoist named Yin Kong chanted his Taoist name and sneered. "It's very simple. It's because we feel that Hua no longer has any true Taoist techniques. Confucius once said, 'If you lose the propriety, you will seek the wild.' Today we are going to spread the true Tao art back to China, lest this Tao art that has been passed down for 2,000 years be destroyed by you guys." Zhang Ling was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She said angrily, "Wow, the Japanese came before, and now you guys are bringing a group of foreign devils to force us to abdicate. Good, very good. It seems that you really regard our Dragon Tiger Mountain as nothing." Yin Kong threw his head back and burst into laughter. He stroked his beard and said contemptuously, "It's because I saw you being bullied by a group of Japanese people, and couldn't even fight back, that I made up my mind. Now there was no true Dharma in China. True Dharma was abroad. Our country lacks faith and etiquette. Now is the time for us to repay them." Zhang Ling scolded angrily, "Bullsh*t. You guys have forgotten your ancestors. How dare you speak so arrogantly?" As the two of them argued, the cultivators on both sides also scolded them, especially the golden-haired and blue-eyed foreigners in gray Taoist robes. Many of them also spoke fluent Chinese, and scolded the cultivators of the Jingyi school. However, they obviously didn't have as many tricks as these natives. They just kept saying things like bastards, idiots, dog sh*t, and so on. How could they be like Zhang Lufang and the others, who kept scolding them for a few minutes without repeating the same words? It was wonderful. In the distance, Li Yundong and Su Chan were dumbfounded when they saw the two sides scolding each other. Su Chan whispered to Li Yundong, "Yundong, what's going on?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "I think I understand a little. It seems that the overseas branch of the Jingyi school has come back to make trouble. It should be regarded as a branch of the Jingyi school coming back to force us to abdicate?" Su Chan asked curiously, "An overseas branch? I understand. It must be a cultivator who ran away during the 10 years of turmoil. At that time they were abroad. Now that they have become successful, they have come back to compete for the position of the leader of the Jingyi school?" Li Yundong said with a strange expression. "It shouldn't be to compete for the position of the leader, right? The position of the leader of the Jingyi school and the position of the Chuanjin school are both the focus of the state. Not everyone can be the leader if they want to. If anyone comes and fights with them and wins, they can become the leader. Wouldn't the world be in chaos?" Su Chan also nodded. "That makes sense. If the leader of the Jingyi school wanted to be stable, he had to be recognized by the current emperor. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to be the leader for long." While they were whispering to each other, Yin Kong suddenly shouted from below, "Zhang Ling, you know very well that my master Zhang Tianfang is also a direct descendant of Celestial Master Zhang. Why can't he inherit the position of sect leader? You object so fiercely. Are you afraid that if my master becomes the leader, your power will fall from then on? Humph! You would rather see the decline of Taoism, because you are nostalgic for the power in your hands. Don't you feel ashamed? Zhang Ling was so angry that her whole body trembled. You are presumptuous. How dare you speak to me like this? At this time, Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly. Well, you really came back to fight for the position of leader? Now there will be a good show to watch. The two sides will definitely fight to the death. Su Chan had never had a good impression of the Jingyi school. She laughed gloatingly and said, Well, fight, hurry up and fight. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He flicked his finger on Su Chan's forehead and glared at her. Are you crazy? You just want to see the world in chaos. Su Chan covered her forehead and made a face at Li Yundong. She was about to refute, but Li Yundong covered her mouth and coaxed. Okay, stop talking. Let's watch the fun. Only then did the two of them look at the field again. She immediately had an idea. She raised her voice and said to Zhang Ling, Zhenren Zhang, the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua will unswervingly support you. You are the righteous sect of our Taoist Hua family. These overseas wanderers don't want to return to their country to serve. Instead, they have wild ambitions and want to come back to plot the family business of their ancestors. They are really worse than pigs and dogs. When the people of the Jingyi school heard this, they were all overjoyed. The way they looked at the people of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua became much gentler and friendlier. The Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua was just a small sect in the cultivation world of the Taoist Hua family. There were not many cultivators in the sect, and there were only a few masters in history. Compared with them, the Jingyi school was a behemoth that needed to be looked up to. Usually, when they met in Jianghu, none of the cultivators of the Jingyi school looked at them seriously. Now that they saw the eyes of the Jingyi school looking at them, all of them felt as if they had drunk sweet wine. They were intoxicated, as if they were floating like immortals. Zhang Ling's eyes flickered as she looked at Ding Nan. She nodded and praised her secretly. Zheng Yuan is a sinister villain, but his disciple is sensible and righteous. Not bad. However, Zhou Ping seemed to have seen through Ding Nan's wishful thinking at a glance. She snorted and said in a low voice, Humph, this guy suddenly took over the position of leader of Zheng Yuan's sect so quickly. There must be something shameful going on. If you ask me, she's not in the right place. She wants to make friends with us and get our recognition. Zhang Ling glanced at her conspiracy theorist disciple and shook her head. Why do we care how she got the position of leader? As long as she doesn't do evil like Zheng Yuan, I don't care how she got it. Besides, she is the first cultivator from another sect who has expressed support for us. We have to accept such kindness. Otherwise, will anyone still support our Jingyi school in the future? As she said this, she stepped forward, bowed, and said in a clear voice, I haven't asked for your name yet. Ding Nan's face lit up with joy, and her eyes lit up. She didn't dare to be arrogant anymore. She jumped down from the high platform gracefully and returned the salute to Zhang Ling. I'm Ding Nan, the leader of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua. Zhang Ling smiled slightly and said, It turns out that the leader of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua has come to visit us. Sorry for not going out to meet you. Ding Nan was overjoyed. She knew that after Zhang Ling's words, she had been recognized by the Jingyi school as the leader of the sect. Even if others wanted to question her, they would have to think twice. Since the Jingyi school has admitted it, why wouldn't we? The two sides greeted each other, and the Taoist priests in gray robes were all furious. A tall Taoist priest pointed at Ding Nan and shouted angrily, Who are you? Where did you come from? How dare you interrupt here? Ding Nan wanted to kill someone here to establish her prestige, but her expression remained unchanged. She turned around with a smile and asked in a reserved and polite manner, I haven't asked for your name yet, Jinren. The tall Taoist priest spat and said, Bah, what name? I'm so jealous. My name is Yintian. What do you want? Do you want to fight with me? Ding Nan smiled and lowered her head, a sharp light flashing in her eyes. She took advantage of the gesture of cupping her hands, touched the Hel Wuzhong enchanting jade hidden in her sleeve with her finger, and whispered the other party's name. Suddenly, a few ferocious spirits rushed out of Ding Nan's body again, and in the blink of an eye, they rushed in front of Intian. Intian had seen Ding Nan's killing methods before, so he had been hiding in the dark. When he suddenly saw these spirits rushing over, he was shocked. He immediately shouted and stuck a talisman in front of him. Just as he was about to recite a spell, he suddenly felt his feet go numb. It turned out that Ding Nan had instructed the threaded hairpin of soul, traversing the ground, to sneak up behind Intian, and suddenly stabbed the Yongquan point in his feet from underground. Intian roared, and his mind suddenly trembled. He felt that the threaded hairpin of soul traversing jade was madly sucking his Jinqi underground. He wanted to resist, but the spirits of the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade had already rushed in front of him, roaring and dragging his soul out. Although Intian himself was also a Jinshin master, the threaded hairpin of soul traversing jade was a rare powerful magical weapon with the effect of breaking through defense. Moreover, after absorbing the Jinqi of Gufeng and Yi Yu of the Fox Zen School, as well as Zheng Yuan, the leader of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua, his spiritual energy had also become very powerful. In addition, with the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in front of him to lure the enemy, all of Intian's Jinqi was used to defend the front. Therefore, the threaded hairpin of soul traversing jade's sneak attack was successful, causing a Jinshin master to be killed in an instant. This time, even Li Yundong, a great master with rich experience in fighting, was shocked. He couldn't help but exclaim, "This Ding Nan is really shameless and insidious. This is too insidious and too difficult to defend against. Even I, if I'm caught off guard, I'm afraid I'll fall for it." Although the Jinshin of cultivators was powerful, not all of their bodies were protected by it, especially the gushing spring at the soles of people's feet. This was a place that very few people would use the power of Jinshin to protect. Even if someone wanted to protect it, it would be much weaker than other places. Ding Nan had taken advantage of this mentality of the other party and successfully launched a sneak attack, killing the cultivator, who had spoken rudely to her in front of everyone. At this time, when everyone saw that Intian had been sucked dry in the blink of an eye, they all burst into an uproar. The cultivator in the gray Taoist robe looked at Ding Nan in horror, and for a moment, many people were so frightened by her that they took a step back. However, because Su Chan had been entangled with the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade several times, she suddenly said to Li Yundong, "Yundong, this seems to be the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade." Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes lit up. "Yes, now that you mention it, it must be Zheng Yuan's powerful magical weapon that has fallen into Ding Nan's hands." The two of them could see that the cultivator in the gray Taoist robe was also sharp-eyed and had seen some clues. Inkong whispered a few words to a foreign Taoist priest with golden hair and blue eyes beside him. The foreigner looked at Ding Nan with some fear, but then Inkong patted him on the shoulder. Only then did he swallow hard, walk up to the arena, and say loudly in a strange Chinese accent, Do you dare to fight me one-on-one?" When Ding Nan saw that a foreigner had come up to challenge her, she immediately burst out laughing. The disciples of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua also roared with laughter. Song Guohua even shouted at the top of his lungs, "Leader of Mount Wuhua, I am so powerful that I am the only one in the world." Ding Nan had defeated two people in a row, especially one who was a powerful Jinshin master. The Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in her sleeve had swallowed the soul of this Jinshin master, and her spiritual energy had soared. Her self-confidence had swelled unprecedentedly. She pointed at the foreigner and said loudly, "Tell me your name. I don't kill nameless people." The foreigner swallowed hard and stammered, "My name is Adriano Chevalier, Adolphus Branné, David Frederick Hamburg, John Martin Ned, Paul Rodenfeld, Schallman Thomas Victor, William and Scourges Zeus Wolf de Matt Sendernier, Rome Hanks Schill." At first, Ding Nan listened with a smile on her face, but the more she listened, the more stunned she became. When she heard the foreigner mention Hanks Schill, she couldn't help but shout, "Why is your name so long?" The foreigner smiled and said seriously, This is just my surname. I haven't said my name yet." Ding Nan almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Her face was dull, and the corners of her eyes couldn't help twitching. She stared blankly at the foreigner who was stammering her name, and couldn't say anything for a while. When the cultivators of the various sects heard the foreigner say their names for more than a minute, they all looked at him dumbfounded and speechless. Ding Nan had a splitting headache, and was sweating profusely. She glared at the foreigner angrily, and thought to herself, could it be that they found out that I was using the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade, and deliberately sent a guy with such a long name to deal with me? The Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade was indeed a powerful magical weapon that was once known to be invincible in the world. In particular, it could be upgraded infinitely, and was extremely difficult to guard against. However, it had a major shortcoming, which was that the user had to know the other party's name, and use the other party's name to lock on to the other party, before it could be used against the enemy. Otherwise, this magical weapon was no different from ordinary jade. Ding Nan glared at the foreigner angrily and shouted, "Are you messing with me? How could a person's name be so long?" The foreigner still smiled and said, "I was born in southern Sweden. When I was 5 years old, my parents hadn't given me a name yet. This violated the Swedish surname law, so they were fined 5,000 kronor. My parents were so angry that they gave me such a long name. It's really a little hard to remember, isn't it?" Ding Nan was so angry that she gritted her teeth and said angrily, "Do you dare to repeat your name again?" The foreigner was indeed honest. He honestly repeated his surname again. This time, he was much more fluent and quickly said his name. Ding Nan listened attentively to his name and wanted to remember it, but halfway through, she felt dizzy and had a headache. How could she remember the rest of the name? When the foreigner finished, Ding Nan stood motionless and did not speak for a long time. After a long time, the corner of her mouth twitched, and her expression was dull. She glared at the foreigner with extremely depressed eyes, snorted angrily, and turned to leave. At this time, Li Yundong, who was on the top of the mountain, had already laughed so hard that he almost fell off the mountain. As he wiped his tears, he burst into laughter and said, "Oh, Ding Nan must be crying in her heart. Damn it, why did you give me such a long name? Are you kidding me?" She fell into Li Yundong's arms, covered her stomach, and giggled. "I've cultivated for 10 years to reach the Jinshin phase, but it's not as long as someone else's name. Well, the former Fox's Nest Group 9 was disbanded by a dear book friend. Now it's reopened. If you want to join, hurry up. 5890697. Chapter 722. The situation on the field had obviously surprised everyone. Not everyone could see Ding Nan's depression and strangeness, but in the eyes of those who were observant, it was obvious that Ding Nan was right. Yusun, Song Guohua, and the other disciples of Mount Wuhua, who had been shouting slogans loudly, were also stunned. The words "sect leader of Mount Wuhua is so powerful" came to an abrupt halt. Song Guohua stared blankly at Ding Nan, who had returned. He wanted to cheer for her, but judging from the situation in front of him, it didn't seem that Ding Nan had won the fight, did it? But why did his sect leader come back on his own without even fighting? Yes, he couldn't use the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade, but there must be other powerful magical weapons, right? Could it be that even if he used these powerful magical weapons, he still couldn't defeat this foreign devil? This foreign devil was not powerful, and he could also defeat him. Song Guohua asked tentatively, "Palm." As soon as he said a word, Ding Nan glared at him angrily and shouted in a low voice, "Shut up, don't ask anything." Song Guohua immediately shut his mouth obediently. He looked back at Alba, who was trying hard to hold back her laughter, and suddenly said in a low voice, "Hey, why do you foreigners have such long names? Your name is also so long?" Alba couldn't help but burst out laughing, but as soon as she laughed, she saw Ding Nan glaring at her angrily. She was startled and quickly pulled a long face, looking as if she had suffered a great deal of hatred. She said seriously, "Master, my name is very short." As soon as she said this, some of the other members of the Inyang sect reacted and secretly laughed. Ding Nan was furious. "Shut up, all of you." When Zheng Yuan had just died, Ding Nan had used cruel means to kill Zheng Yuan's hardcore followers of the Inyang faction. After a bloody massacre, She had naturally established a lot of prestige. At this time, she had killed 2 people in a second, which had doubled her prestige. Her shout immediately scared the others into silence, for fear of provoking their sect leader. When the foreigner with the long name saw Ding Nan coming down from the field, he was still a little stunned. He looked around blankly, then pointed to himself in disbelief. I seem to have won. After saying that, he danced with joy. Haha, I won. He turned his head to Kong and said happily, Master, I won. I actually won. This seems to be called taking the opponent's illness without fighting. The corner of Kong's eyes couldn't help but twitch when he saw him scratching his ears and cheeks impatiently. He shouted in a low voice, Idiot, this is the art of subduing the enemy without fighting. Come back quickly, don't embarrass yourself there. The foreigner replied with an "Oh," and obediently returned to the crowd. However, as soon as he stood still, he was overjoyed and started to celebrate with his fellow disciples. Almost there, Kong seemed to be used to these foreigners' behavior. He glanced at Ding Nan coldly, snorted and said in a cold voice, Jimren Ding, don't you want to stand up for me? Why did you enter the field? Ding Nan smiled slightly but didn't speak. She just glanced at Song Guohua. Song Guohua reacted very quickly and immediately understood. He said loudly, That's not right. What's the seniority of our leader? What's the seniority of your foreign disciple? Isn't it disgraceful for my master to compete with him? His words were opportunistic, but they were reasonable. Ding Nan couldn't help but feel very satisfied when she heard this. But what made her even happier was that now that she was the leader, she no longer had to act according to others' eyes. Unlike before, she had to pay attention to Zhou Qin's or Zheng Yuan's expressions or eyes all the time. As long as there was the slightest mistake, she had to stand up and speak for them as a shield. Now, as long as she gave a wink, someone would stand up and speak for her obediently. She was so happy. Ding Nan was now like a drug addict who couldn't stop. It was absolutely impossible for her to give up the little power in her hands and her cultivation. She had already been involved in the big whirlpool of the cultivation world, and she was getting deeper and deeper. Of course, others didn't know what she was thinking, but Li Yundong, who was watching from afar, felt a little emotional. After laughing for a while, he looked at the woman who had once ridiculed him in the past, and had once confided in him like a young girl in love. For a moment he felt a lot of emotions. Su Chan, who was standing to one side, was still smiling heartlessly. She giggled and said, Yundong, don't you think Ding Nan is a little stupid? If the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is useless, she still has other powerful magical weapons. Even if she doesn't, she can probably defeat this foreign devil with magic, right? This foreign devil seems to only be in the Zhuji phase. Li Yundong shook his head with a smile and patted the girl's head. On the contrary, Ding Nan is not stupid. She is very smart. In my opinion, her position as the leader of the sect is a little strange. So deep in her heart, she is eager to be recognized by others. Otherwise, she would definitely not get involved in this mess. Moreover, she has already achieved her goal of killing people to establish her prestige. In the future, if anyone in the cultivation world wants to make trouble for her, they will have to think twice. It's just the right time to stop now. Su Chan was not a fool, so she understood immediately. Her eyes lit up. Yes, even if she can kill this foreigner, it won't do her any more good. It's better to stop while she's ahead. However, now these cultivators of the Zhengyi school should have seen through her trump card. I'm afraid it will be difficult for her to sneak attack again. Li Yundong chuckled and said, Although the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is powerful, as long as I'm not caught off guard, it's not impossible to guard against it. But if this powerful magical weapon is used together with the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, it's a little powerful. Moreover, if I'm not mistaken, Ding Nan should still have the immortal pin in her hand. Her current cultivation is not very high, but with these 3 magic treasures in hand, it's really a little scary. If used properly, even if I'm not injured, I will have to temporarily avoid it. Su Chan frowned and sighed softly. I hope that Ding Nan will not go against us in the future. Otherwise, The Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade will be too difficult to guard against. But, Yundong, this Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade is so powerful. How did the cultivator, who held this powerful magical weapon, be defeated? Li Yundong laughed and said, You asked the right person. When I was in the spirit space, I once read Cultivation Chronicles. It said that the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade had appeared in the world twice. The first time was during the reign of Emperor Huizong of the Song dynasty. A cultivator named Jinren Xiantian used this vicious powerful magical weapon. At that time, this cultivator relied on this powerful magical weapon to run amok on the land of Jiangxi. At that time, famous cultivators almost avoided him when they saw him. Even Zhang Tianshi was no exception. But later, Jingyi school came up with a solution. They chose the strongest but least famous disciple of the younger generation to go down the mountain to find trouble with Jinren Xiantian. At that time, when Jinren Xiantian was bullying men and women, he suddenly met this nameless Jingyi disciple and started fighting. Li Yundong said with a strange smile, It's a pity that Jinren Xiantian, who dominated the world, was still trying to find out the other party's name when he was about to be killed by this Jingyi disciple. When Su Chan heard this, she couldn't help but laugh. This guy is so stupid. If he can't get the other party's name, he will use other methods to fight with him. However, Li Yundong shook his head and smiled. When you have a powerful magical weapon in your hand, you will become overly dependent on it. You always want to use your strongest point to defeat your opponent, but you ignore other things. Speaking of which, it's not a good thing to rely too much on powerful magical weapons. Ding Nan looks tyrannical and domineering now, but if her cultivation doesn't keep up, she will be no different from Ise Chuyan. If she meets a top master, she will definitely lose. Su Chan blinked and asked, What about the second guy who held the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade? How was he defeated? Li Yundong said with a smile. The second one was in the Jiajing period of the Ming dynasty. A cultivator named He Yetong refined the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade again. At the beginning, Jinren he was much more cautious and low-key than Xiantian. He never fought with people he didn't know. It wasn't until the powerful magical weapon in his hand, and he knew almost all the names of the masters in the cultivation world, that he began to kill. He even thought of using the emperor to control the princes. This angered the Son of Heaven. Emperor Jiajing flew into a rage and mobilized 20,000 imperial guards and 300 cultivators to gang up on him. They crushed him to pieces. Su Chan opened her mouth slightly and said tongue-tied, Ah, so miserable. Li Yundong chuckled and said, Of course. No matter how powerful the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade is, it's still a powerful magical weapon for one-on-one combat. There were so many names on the field. Could you read them all? Even if you could, it would be like chanting a spell. The others would have killed you long ago. In fact, in that battle Jinren He, who was almost invincible in one-on-one combat, only had time to kill 2 cultivators before he was blasted into powder by countless powerful magical weapons and magic formations. As he spoke, Li Yundong sighed with emotion. Speaking of which, this Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade is not a good thing. Its murderous aura is too strong, and it's an ominous thing. I'm afraid that Ding Nan holding it will be a disaster rather than a blessing. Su Chan blinked and looked at Li Yundong, her face full of admiration. Yundong, you really know a lot. I've never heard Master talk about this before. Li Yundong rubbed the little girl's head dotingly and said with a smile, As the emperor, he naturally has to prohibit these things from being spread among the people. Even if there are records and books, they have to be banned and destroyed. Since ancient times, heroes have used martial arts to violate the ban. Those who practice martial arts have already been very feared by the emperor, let alone these cultivators. Those cultivation sects are large and have many conflicts with each other, so they naturally don't dare to rebel at will. However, lone heroes like He Yetong and Xiantian are very unscrupulous. If these things are spread around, I'm afraid that there will be villains with bad intentions everywhere, who will join the church to learn the art of dragon slaying. Su Chan suddenly understood, but she quickly asked with a smile, By the way, Yundong, if you used this powerful magical weapon just now with your memory, Can you remember such a long name that the foreigner recited? Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Since ancient times, there has only been a saying that people have a photographic memory. How can there be such a thing as an unforgettable ear? Even if there is, it is only amazing lyrics and poems. It takes a full minute to recite a name that has no logical connection with each other. Not to mention me, even the Emperor of Heaven will have a headache after hearing his name. Su Chan giggled. There are also times when you can't do it? Li Yundong's face darkened. Are you itching for a fart? How can you say that your man can't do it? When I recover, you will know whether I can do it or not. Su Chan giggled and said, You are always King annoying. You might as well take a Russian name and call it Sabuksky. It's such a long name. How good is it? It can also prevent Ding Nan from using the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade to hook your soul. Li Yundong's face was serious as he said, Then you might as well take a name too. Call it, I won't feel comfortable without a spanking. What do you think? After that, the two of them looked at each other and laughed. Chapter 723. The two of them laughed for a while, but the situation outside the field changed again. Seeing that Ding Nan had tactfully retreated, Inkong didn't want to continue to entangle with her. Although he was not willing to let Ding Nan kill two of his fellow disciples in seconds, he had priorities. Although he hated this beautiful woman in his heart, what was more important at the moment was the important matter of the Jingyi school. They had prepared for a long time for today's mountaineering, although they had only come to test the waters. When they heard the news that the Japanese cultivation world was coming to make trouble, and that the Jingyi school had lost face, Inkong was even more overjoyed. He believed that today was the weakest time of the Jingyi school, so he made up his mind to take charge and force them to abdicate. Even if this matter failed, he could find out the details of the other party. If he succeeded, it would definitely be a great contribution. After the leader ascended in the future, would the position fall into the hands of others? Because of this, Ding Nan was only a trouble for Inkong, while the disciples of the Jingyi school, who claimed to be the authentic Xianmen, were the real trouble. Although Ding Nan's magic treasures and trump cards had been seen through by him, it would take a lot of energy to deal with her in a short time. Moreover, who knew if she had other powerful magical weapons? In the cultivation world, even if it was a Jinshin master, if he did not know the opponent's magic treasure or details, he would suddenly be caught off guard by the opponent's magic treasure, and even his body and soul would be destroyed. Over the past thousands of years, there had been as many cases as the hairs on an ox. When Li Yundong had suddenly encountered the immortal tying rope, because he didn't know the characteristics of this powerful magical weapon, he had reached out his hand rashly. As a result, he had been tightly tied up. At that time, Li Yundong was a young boy and didn't know this. But Inkong was a great cultivator who had cultivated for decades. Naturally, it was impossible for him not to know this. There was a saying in the martial arts world, the older a person is, the less courageous he is. This saying was also applicable in the world of cultivation. However, in the world of martial arts and cultivation, this kind of courage did not mean that they were timid. Instead, it meant that they would be more cautious and more cautious. Years of living and experience had long smoothed out their sharpness, making them even more cautious, in case they failed miserably in an easy task. What really made Inkong wary were the two fierce men of the Jingyi school, Sect Master Zhang Tianshi, and the former head of the Linggong sect, Wang Yuanshan. Although it was rumored that Wang Yuanshan had ascended 10 years ago, only Celestial Master Zhang was left. However, a Lightning Tribulation Master was a Lightning Tribulation Master after all. He could transcend the Lightning Tribulation at any time and become an immortal. It was currently winter, and if spring came, Celestial Master Zhang would have transcended the 9 Lightning Tribulations and become a mortal immortal. At that time, it would be extremely difficult to deal with him. Almost there, it was precisely because of this thought that Inkong decisively stopped looking for trouble with Ding Nan. He just said a few words to save face. Humph, Jimren Ding, you really have a good trick. We, the Xiantian sect of Jingyi school, will remember this. After that, He turned his head and pointed his spear at the Jingyi school again. Inkong sneered and said, "Zhenren Zhang, look. How weak are you now? Don't you feel ashamed that you even need outsiders to help you with your internal affairs?" Zhang Ling was domineering and arrogant, so she naturally refused to admit defeat. She sneered and said, "Anyone with a discerning eye can tell who is right and who is wrong at a glance. This fellow cultivator can't stand your behavior of forgetting your ancestors, so he helped you out of righteousness. You can control the mouths of your disciples, but can you control the mouths of all the cultivators in the world?" Inkong raised his head and laughed. "You're really eloquent. Good. It's a pity that we cultivators practice Dharma, Qi, flesh and Taoist magic arts, not our mouths. No matter how eloquent you are, it's useless if you can't beat us in the end." Zhang Ling raised her eyebrows and sneered. "Oh, you finally revealed your fox's tail? You want to fight? Well, how can we fight? We'll keep you company." Inkong sneered, pointed to his disciples and shouted, "Disciples of the Xiantian sect, listen up." Although he had brought a lot of foreigners with him this time, only a few of them had received the true teachings. Most of them were sent to make up the numbers. The main force was still the black-headed, yellow-skinned Chinese cultivators. As soon as Inkong shouted, dozens of Chinese disciples jumped out, holding long swords in their hands, and quickly set up a large formation. Inkong pointed to the field and said proudly, "If any one of you can break this Xiantian formation, we'll leave immediately. What do you think?" Zhang Ling glanced around and saw that the dozens of Chinese disciples had set up a strange sword formation. In particular, there were two golden-eyed foreigners at the center of the formation. She sneered in her heart and was about to step forward when Zhang Kongyun grabbed her arm and whispered, "Shiji, this formation is a little strange. Don't be careless. Since the other party dared to come, they must be fearless. Let me do it." Zhang Ling immediately shook her head and said, "No, Shiji, you've just been injured. You can't fight with others now, or there will be endless trouble in the future." However, Zhang Kongyun said anxiously, "Shiji, if I don't do it, who else can?" Zhang Ling was silent for a while. She looked around and saw that although there were many disciples of the Jingyi school, there were 500 or 600 of them. However, many of these people were masters at the top phase of yang spirit, which was similar to her own cultivation. They were only one step away from the Jinshin. As cultivators who had cultivated for decades, as long as they had a little more time, they might have more Jinshin. Soon. Once a cultivator reached the Jinshin phase, they would realize a qualitative change and completely enter a new world. This was the case for the Jingyi school at the moment. There was an obvious bottleneck and vacuum in the sect's strength. After Wang Yuanshan, who was known as the #1 in the world, betrayed the sect, the strength of the Jingyi school suffered an unprecedented blow. Later, Zhang Tianshi had to go into seclusion. On the one hand, he had to work hard to improve his strength, and on the other hand, he had to prevent others from challenging him and revealing his true strength. A top master was not terrible. What was terrible was that others did not know how strong he was. Zhang Tianshi was obviously well versed in this psychological tactic. He had been in seclusion for 10 years, so no one knew what kind of realm he had reached. Thus, they did not dare to easily make a move against the behemoth of the Jingyi school. At this time, in terms of the number of masters at the top phase of yang spirit in the Jingyi school, there were probably 300 or 400 cultivators present. They were definitely the best in the world. In time, 1 in 10 of these masters would transform into Jinshin masters, and the Jingyi school would immediately become an extremely terrifying cultivation sect. But now, among these masters at the yang spirit phase, the one who could fight the best was herself. The Jinshin phase was even more lacking, and only Zhang Kongyun was left. Zhang Ling couldn't help but sigh. Time waits for no man. These traitors didn't come earlier or later, but chose to come at this time. Their sinister intentions are truly infuriating. On the side of the Jingyi school, there was a sense of pain and entanglement. However, Su Chan, who was in the distance, said to Li Yundong in a low voice, "Yundong, they're going to fight. Do you think we should help them?" Li Yundong snapped his fingers and flicked her on the forehead. "Help? How? Do you want to help with your life? Which side do you want to help? This is their internal affairs. Why should we get involved? Watch the show, watch the show. Suchan covered her forehead and pouted. I was just saying. Why do you have to get physical? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He held the little girl in his arms and began to get physical. The two of them flirted with each other while watching the show. Especially at this time, the two sides were at each other's throats. The situation was so tense that it was suffocating. It was like watching a movie in the cinema. If there was a bucket of popcorn at this time, it would be perfect. After playing with Li Yundong for a while, Suchan obediently nestled in his arms and carefully looked at the sword formation. She found that although the formation of the Big Dipper and the 7 stars of the Southern Dipper could be vaguely seen, there were 3 more places where the sword chi was soaring into the sky. The killing intent was extremely strong. Even from a distance, she could feel a sharp chi coming at her, causing her skin to sting slightly. She said curiously, Yundong, this sword formation is so strange. It seems to be very scary. Li Yunyang was shocked by the sword chi of the sword formation, and all his hair stood on end. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at it. Then, he pointed at the 3 formation eyes with the heaviest sword chi in the sword formation and said, this sword formation is in the form of Ziwei Do, and the 3 formation eyes are filled with murderous intent. If I'm not wrong, this should be the 7 killing star, the destruction star, and the greedy wolf star of the 3 killing stars. Once these 3 formation eyes are activated by the magic formation, they will immediately form a terrifying killing wolf destruction formation that will not stop until one of them dies. Suchan naturally knew that the words killing wolf destruction formation represented an irreversible destructive force between heaven and earth. Her face suddenly changed in horror. So powerful. Who can break this formation? Yundong, can you break it? Li Yundong's face gradually became serious, and he couldn't help thinking, if it were me, how could I break this Xiantian formation? In this formation, if any cultivator fought with me one-on-one, they would just be sending themselves to death. I'm afraid that no one can fight with me for more than 3 rounds. However, the great mysterious heaven formation that these dozens of people had formed was not just a combination of the strength of dozens of people, but a terrifying geometric increase. The power of this formation was based on the cultivators in the formation eyes. Even if everyone in the formation eyes was a Yang spirit master, 3 of them together was a basic addition, which was 3. However, with each addition, the power would be multiplied by 2 on the basis of these 2 people, which was 6. Then, another person would be multiplied by 2 again, which was 12. In this way, when the strength of dozens of people was repeatedly superimposed, it was simply unimaginable how powerful it was. Li Yundong observed it carefully for a while, and felt that this formation was almost perfect and flawless. No matter where he attacked, it would attract a fierce and terrifying counterattack from the other side. Dozens of times the strength would come roaring like a landslide. It was really not something that a single person could resist. The more Li Yundong looked at it, the more frightened he became. Inadvertently, he felt cold sweat running down his back. He thought to himself, no wonder it's said that there are powerful magical weapons above magic, and there are magic formations above powerful magical weapons. After a series of fierce battles, Li Yundong had broken the Thunder Retribution with the power of Jinshin and defeated the Japanese cultivation world by himself. Even if he was not very proud, he still had some thoughts of looking down on the world. But now that Li Yundong suddenly saw this terrifying Xiantian formation, his pride immediately disappeared, and he didn't dare to look down on the heroes of the world anymore. He was shocked and thought to himself, how could this overseas force of the Jingyi school, which suddenly appeared out of nowhere, use such a powerful magic formation? How powerful is the Sanju formation of the Jingyi school, which is known as the end of heaven, end of earth, and end of man? He was secretly frightened as he watched from above. Zhang Kongyan, who was below the field, was naturally a person who knew what was good for him. The more he watched, the more serious his expression became. After watching for more than a minute, his forehead was covered with beads of sweat, and his lips were trembling slightly. Looking at Zhang Kongyan's appearance, Ying Kong couldn't help laughing wildly. What do you think? If you don't have the guts, just give up. Zhang Kongyan calmed down and gave Zhang Ling, who was beside him, a reassuring look. Then he took a deep breath and shouted, Wang Yuanshan, if you stand by and do nothing, Mount Longhu will be completely replaced. Do you really want to see this happen? His loud shout caused the expressions of many people from both the Jingyi school and the Xintian sect to suddenly change. Only a few people in the world knew that Wang Yuanshan was not dead. Most people only knew that Wang Yuanshan had betrayed the sect and then been captured by the Jingyi school. Not long after, he had ascended to heaven. But now they suddenly heard that Wang Yuanshan, who had been known as the best in the world 10 years ago, was still alive. This was like a shocking thunder in their ears. Wang Yuanshan is not dead. Ying Kong's face changed, and he looked at Zhang Kongyan in surprise. But after looking around for a while and seeing no one appear, he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He sneered and said, You're not so scared that you've started to talk nonsense, are you? Zhang Kongyan didn't even look at him. He just said loudly, Wang Yuanshan, no matter what happened in the past, you used to be a member of our Jingyi school. You don't want to see our sect, which has been passed down for thousands of years, disappear, do you? Zhang Kongyan's voice was so loud that it spread far away. It shook the valley and echoed. For a moment, everyone was silent. They all looked around, searching for the figure of the former best in the world. But after searching for a while, they only saw green mountains and blue waters, and the shadows of trees. Where could they find anyone else? Ying Kong waited for a while in fear, but he still didn't see Wang Yuanshan. He couldn't help laughing and said, It seems that you are really crazy. Do you still want to call back the soul of a man who has been dead for 10 years? As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a very magnetic middle-aged man sigh softly not far away from him and say, We were born of the same root. Why are you in such a hurry to kill each other? As soon as the voice sounded, everyone's eyes turned to the source. They saw a man of average stature standing there. He was handsome and had a wisp of beard on his chin, which made him look very elegant. He had his hands behind his back, and his clothes were fluttering in the wind, as if a gust of wind would blow him away. There was an indescribable elegance all over his body. For a moment, a thought suddenly flashed through almost everyone's mind. Is this the best in the world, Wang Yuanshan? Chapter 724. Although there was no first in martial arts and no second in martial arts, in the 5,000 years of history of the Chinese people, there were very few who dared to claim to be the best in the world and be recorded in the history books and recognized by the world. Soon even a great man like immortal Zhang Sanfeng, who had lived from the end of the Southern Song dynasty to the beginning of the Ming dynasty, had reached the peak of cultivation and could be called a living immortal, had never been called the best in the world. Although he could be called a grandmaster, even a person like Zhang Sanfeng did not dare to be presumptuous when he came to Mount Longhu. In the same way, Celestial Master Zhang of Mount Longhu had also been defeated in fights. In the early Qing dynasty, Celestial Master Zhang traveled to the Shangyun Temple in Lianyungang on the surface of Jiangsu province. On a whim, he fought with the Taoist priest and was defeated. From this, it could be seen that there were many hidden talents in China. Even powerful people like Zhang Sanfeng and Celestial Master Zhang did not dare to claim to be the best in the world. But since the ancient times, there had always been one or two extraordinary geniuses who could captivate the hearts of all living beings with their earth-shattering talent. Since the founding of Xian, the closest master to be recognized as the world's best fighter was the world's best fighter, Sun Lutang. Sun Lutang entered the path of cultivation through martial arts and eventually reached the peak of cultivation. His cultivation was admired and respected by the cultivation world. However, Sun Lutang became an immortal in 1929, and for nearly 80 years, he was not recognized as the best in the world, until Celestial Master Zhang of Jingyi School publicly admitted that Wang Yuanshan's cultivation was higher than his, and that he was stronger than him in fights. Therefore, Wang Yuanshan was recognized as the best in the world by the world. When Celestial Master Zhang promoted Wang Yuanshan, he wanted him to become famous. However, since ancient times, there was no first in martial arts and no second in martial arts. If he dared to claim to be the best in the world, there would definitely be many people who would come to challenge him. Wang Yuanshan did live up to expectations at the beginning and defeated the masters of various sections. However, when he was famous all over the world, he met his nemesis, Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang had also heard of Wang Yuanshan's reputation as the best in the world. She was not convinced and wanted to test him, but she was completely defeated and even lost her body and mind. As soon as the two of them met, Wang Yuanshan, the genius most favored by Zhang Tianshi of the Jingyi school, immediately rebelled and threw himself into the arms of the beauty. Then, Zhang Tianshi flew into a rage and mobilized all the forces of the Jingyi school to capture Wang Yuanshan. It was also because of this battle that Wang Yuanshan single-handedly fought against many masters of the Jingyi school, which made him famous. In the past 10 years, the world had thought that he was dead. Who could defeat a dead person? In the past 10 years, although many outstanding cultivators had emerged from various sects, there was no one like Wang Yuanshan, who was similar to a magical power. Almost there because of this, not only did Wang Yuanshan's reputation as the world's #1 expert not weaken, but it became even more valuable in the eyes of the public. Li Yundong, who was at the top of the mountain, saw that as soon as Wang Yuanshan appeared, everyone was stunned. There was no one on the field who dared to take a deep breath. He couldn't help but feel shocked and emotional. Wang Yuanshan is really not dead. Su Chan's mouth was wide open, almost able to fit her small fist. Master called him just now. Why didn't he come out? Li Yundong was also very shocked. He felt as if he had seen a legendary figure. He sighed and said, "He must have his reasons, right?" Su Chan's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately said, "No, I have to tell Master right away." Li Yundong quickly held her down and glared at her. "Are you crazy? If you go out at this time, won't you expose yourself?" Su Chan responded with an, "Oh," and sat down again with a resentful face. She looked at the field intently. She saw Wang Yuanshan standing in the eyes of the crowd. He really had a kind of unrestrained and otherworldly aura, which made people admire him at first glance. She couldn't help but sigh and say, "The world's #1 expert really deserves his reputation." As she spoke, she suddenly had an idea. She turned to Li Yundong and asked, "Yundong, why do people still say that Wang Yuanshan is the best in the world in the past 10 years? Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's very simple. It's because there has never been a master who can suppress everyone. After all, it's not enough to praise a dead person. If you're not convinced, well, let's first go to the 9th heaven and find Wang Yuanshan to fight. The most terrible thing is not a master who can beat you down at once, because you know his details. One day, you will surpass his realm. But this kind of person who doesn't show his face is different. You never know how strong he is. You are always speculating about his details. After a long time, your Taoist heart will be seriously affected by him. When the time comes, your subconscious will tell you that you can't beat him, because he is the world's #1 expert, and you have always been living in his shadow." Su Chan blinked her eyes and asked again, "If you fight with Wang Yuanshan, who is stronger?" Li Yundong thought for a while and said slowly, "I don't know, but I guess it should be the current Wang Yuanshan. However, since he has appeared, his status as the world's #1 expert is no longer mysterious and terrifying. Sooner or later, someone will test his realm and bottom line. Moreover, as long as he is alive, he may be defeated. On the contrary, if he dies, it will really solidify his title as the world's #1 expert. No one can defeat a dead person." Su Chan suddenly smiled and said, "I finally know why the leaders of the major sects love to cultivate in seclusion so much. It turns out to be this reason." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't talk about it. Let's watch the show and see how powerful the world's #1 expert is." While the two of them were talking, the disciples of the Jingyi school couldn't help exclaiming for a moment. There was surprise and joy in their voices. No matter what, at such a critical moment, A legendary figure like Wang Yuanshan had suddenly appeared. He was really like a savior, which was shocking. On the contrary, the older generation of cultivators of the Xintian sect were secretly a little panicked. But the eyes of the younger generation lit up, and they were eager to have a try, especially the two golden-eyed foreign disciples in the eye of the formation. They couldn't wait to immediately compete with Wang Yuanshan, so that they could replace him. Even Ding Nan, who had just entered the cultivation world, had heard of Wang Yuanshan's name. She stared at Wang Yuanshan and pinched the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade with one hand. Her fingertips were a little white, and her palms were constantly sweating. She kept thinking about a question in her heart. What will happen if I call out Wang Yuanshan's name at this time? Will he die? As soon as this thought came to her mind, Ding Nan subconsciously denied it. Impossible, he is the world's #1 expert. He can't die like this. If he doesn't succeed, I will be miserable. I will definitely be killed by him. Ding Nan didn't realize that she had already lost before she even fought with Wang Yuanshan. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. There was nothing more obvious than this. There were many people who had the same idea as her, and Ying Kong was one of them. Ever since Wang Yuanshan appeared, he immediately stared at every part of Wang Yuanshan's body. His sharp eyes were like a radar, wanting to see through Wang Yuanshan from inside out. Even when Wang Yuanshan raised his hand and moved his foot, Ying Kong firmly remembered them and frantically searched for flaws. If Wang Yuanshan revealed even the slightest flaw, Ying Kong would immediately attack. If he could defeat Wang Yuanshan, then the title of the world's #1 expert would fall on his head. What a great honor it would be. But no matter how hard he looked, Wang Yuanshan didn't have any genuine qi attached to his body, and he couldn't see the power of Jinshin at all. It seemed that there were flaws everywhere. No matter where Wang Yuanshan was hit, Wang Yuanshan seemed to be dead without a doubt. But the more it was like this, the more Ying Kong didn't dare to make a move. He knew that the man standing in front of him was already known as the world's #1 expert 10 years ago. There was no reason for him to stay where he was after 10 years of closed-door training. As soon as Wang Yuanshan appeared, everyone wanted to challenge him, but no one could really make a move. When Li Yunyang saw this scene, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered what the middle-aged man had said to him when he was in a coma. His eyes flashed, as if he had understood something. He thought to himself, is this the highest realm of invincibility, subduing the enemy without fighting? In comparison, my previous earth-shattering and life-or-death battle is inferior. But how can I cultivate to such a realm? Moreover, if Wang Yuanshan really fights, what will the scene be like? I'm really looking forward to it. While he was thinking, Ying Kong finally gave up the idea of making trouble for Wang Yuanshan. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if Wang Yuanshan, who was standing in front of him, was a dazzling sun. He had to narrow his eyes to have the courage to look directly at him and talk to him. Wang Yuanshan, you didn't die? Well, you came at the right time. Our Xintian formation needs a world's #1 expert like you to show its power. As he said this, he pointed to the murderous sword formation on the field and sneered. Wang Yuanshan, do you dare to break into this sword formation? If you dare, I will admit that you are the world's #1 expert. If you don't dare, then give me this #1 expert as soon as possible. When the people of the Jingyi school heard this, they were all furious. Just as they were about to scold him, they were stopped by Zhang Ling, Zhang Kongyan, and the others. They all stared at Wang Yuanshan attentively, wanting to see how he would deal with it. However, Wang Yuanshan showed a trace of an embarrassed smile on his face. He looked at the sword formation and sighed softly. You have dozens of people against me? I'm old. It's not appropriate, is it? Hearing this, Ying Kong was stunned, and an embarrassed expression almost appeared on his face. He had never expected that Wang Yuanshan, who was known as the world's #1 expert, would be so cowardly and reasonable that he could say such a thing. Su Chan, who was looking forward to Wang Yuanshan's great power on the top of the mountain, was stunned for a moment. Then, she burst out laughing. She giggled in Li Yundong's arms and said, Yundong, this Wang Yuanshan is very interesting. Li Yundong flicked his finger on her forehead and said, You have no respect for your elders. He is your grandmaster, okay? Su Chan covered her forehead with her hand and made a face at Li Yundong. What grandmaster? You're so annoying. You left my master alone for 10 years. Humph, I don't like such a grandmaster. Before Li Yundong could speak to her, he saw Yingkong say unwillingly, Wang Yuanshan, do you want to fight them one-on-one? They are all disciples of the younger generation. Don't you feel embarrassed? Wang Yuanshan sighed again and said, I do feel a little embarrassed. As the saying goes, respect the old and love the young. You have to respect me, an old guy, and I also have to love these little guys. However, we are both old guys. Why don't we have a fight? Yingkong was slightly annoyed and said, Wang Yuanshan, don't talk nonsense. When cultivators cultivate to the highest realm, they fight as a group. Individual courage is not enough. Wang Yuanshan nodded gently and said, What you said makes sense. Yingkong was overjoyed and hurriedly said, Then come and try our formation. As long as you dare to break in, even if you can hold on for a minute, we will consider it your win. However, Wang Yuanshan shook his head and said, No, I won't break in. Yingkong narrowed his eyes and said, Wang Yuanshan, is it possible that you don't have an undeserved reputation and don't dare to break in? This sentence was very powerful. Cultivators valued their reputation the most. Many famous cultivators did not easily fight with others because they were afraid that once they made a mistake, they would ruin the reputation they had accumulated over the years. For a moment, everyone held their breath, waiting to see how Wang Yuanshan would deal with it. Even Li Yunyang thought to himself, if it were me, I would probably draw my sword out of its sheath, wouldn't I? However, Wang Yuanshan, who was in everyone's eyes, nodded honestly and said, Well, I wouldn't dare. Yingkong took a deep breath. He felt like his fist had hit cotton. All the words he had prepared were useless at this time. At this time, he really wanted to raise his head and laugh. But the corners of his eyes were twitching so badly that he really couldn't laugh. Everyone was also shocked. Is this Wang Yuanshan so cowardly? No way. Yingkong laughed dryly. He pointed at Wang Yuanshan and said angrily, I think you are not the best fighter in the world, but the best receiver in the world. Anyone who was a little fashionable could understand that this sentence was extremely insulting. As long as one still had balls in his crotch, he would immediately fly into a rage after hearing it. However, Wang Yuanshan just smiled and cupped his hands, saying, I don't deserve it, I don't deserve it. Jianghu people appreciate me. It was as if Yingkong was praising him. For a moment, everyone gasped and thought to themselves, Oh my God, this Wang Yuanshan is really a coward. Seeing that he was not angry at all, could it be that Wang Yuanshan's nickname was the world's best taker back then? But later on, someone misrepresented it as the world's best taker. And in the end, it became the world's best taker? Sorry, it's late. There will be another chapter in a while. Chapter 725. Everyone saw that Wang Yuanshan, who was said to have passed away, had reappeared and was actually so terrified in front of everyone. Zhang Lufang, who had always admired Wang Yuanshan's name, couldn't help but shout at Wang Yuanshan anxiously. Sect leader Wang, he's cursing you. Wang Yuanshan looked at the person who spoke in surprise. Ah, is he scolding me? Aren't you praising me for being the best in the world? Zhang Lufang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said you're the world's best receiver, not the world's best fighter. It's the bottom, not the hand. Wang Yuanshan had a look of realization. Oh, so that's how it is. I thought he was speaking a dialect of some place. So the pronunciation was a little different. I've learned something new. Little martial nephew, thank you. As expected, one is never too old to learn. Sigh, after not coming out for 10 years, I really can't keep up with the times. Speaking of which, what did the world's most beloved mean? Are they synonyms? Fake characters? When everyone saw what he did, they couldn't help but snicker secretly. Zhang Lufang stared at Wang Yuanshan dumbfounded. She seemed to have heard a high and mighty, sacred thing in the depths of her heart being smashed to pieces. Wang Yuanshan and Zhang Kongyan had a very close personal relationship. Although Zhang Kongyan had personally let him into the trap, Deep in Zhang Kongyan's heart, he admired and worshipped his best friend. In private, he often told Zhang Lufang how great Wang Yuanshan was in the past. But at this time, Zhang Liufang's eyes were wide open, and she muttered to herself, "No way this is the world's #1 Wang Yuanshan? Master, are you sure this is Wang Yuanshan? Why do I feel like he's talking like a mother-in-law?" Zhang Kongyan did not know whether to laugh or cry. He tugged at his beard fiercely, and his old face scrunched up. He cursed in a very low voice, "This bastard. Is he deliberately playing tricks on us?" Su Chan, who was on the cliff, also giggled and said, "So this is how the world's #1 expert comes to be? Was it a local dialect? So these past 10 years were all just rumors?" Li Yundong rolled his eyes. "Idiot. Was there such a thing as receiving 10 years ago? He's pretending to be confused. Can't you see that?" Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong. "Why can't I tell? He can make jokes, but I can't. Besides, aren't you the kind of guy who likes to mess with people the most? You look a lot like him to me. No wonder my master told me privately that you are very similar to Wang Yuanshan. He could see his shadow in you." Li Yundong raised his head and laughed. He said arrogantly, "Bullshit, he is him and I am me. In the future, it's hard to say who looks like who." Seeing that he was a little jealous and unhappy, she smiled and said, Yes, my master is the only one in the world. Even Wang Yuanshan has to stand aside. He's just a little stronger than you now. In the future, you'll definitely be a little stronger than him, okay?" Li Yundong deliberately said with a straight face. "Humph, although my current cultivation is not as good as his, I'm much more handsome than him." Su Chan laughed and trembled. Yes, my master is the most handsome, so handsome." Li Yundong snorted and pinched the little girl's chubby cheeks lovingly. His eyes looked at the field again, only to see that Jinren Yingkong of the Xiantian sect was really shocked by Wang Yuanshan's cowardice. He stood where he was and looked at Wang Yuanshan dumbfoundedly, not knowing what to say for a moment. The disciples of his sect all lowered their heads and tried to hold back their laughter. How could they still be in the mood to set up the sword formation? The murderous Xiantian formation had been completely destroyed. Soon, Wang Yuanshan wanted to pretend to be stupid, but he couldn't force him to make a move, could he? Yingkong knew that the magic formation of the Xiantian sect was extremely powerful. Even if a golden immortal entered the magic formation, he would have to go in standing and come out lying down. No matter how powerful Wang Yuanshan was, once he entered the magic formation, he would be blasted into pieces. However, this magic formation also had the biggest drawback. That was, it couldn't be moved and could only be static defense. Wang Yuanshan obviously saw through this at a glance. He refused to enter the formation no matter what, thinking that Yingkong wouldn't dare to do anything to him outside the formation. Even if a street gangster or a gangster saw this kind of rogue kung fu, they would have to sigh and retreat. Yingkong's face turned purple. Obviously, he was a little confused by Wang Yuanshan's shocking cowardice. He stammered, "Wang Yuanshan, you are really..." Wang Yuanshan looked at Yingkong with a smile and said, "Really what?" Yingkong's face turned red, and he roared, "You are really shameless. You are the shame of our generation of cultivators." Wang Yuanshan looked surprised and said, "It's strange. Dozens of you want to beat me up. Is it strange that I refuse? You have so many young people bullying an old man like me. Don't you think it's shameless? Why do you blame me for being shameless? What kind of logic is this?" Everyone couldn't help but laugh. Although they felt that Wang Yuanshan's words were reasonable, the disciples of Xiantian sect could clearly see that although Wang Yuanshan's voice was that of a middle-aged man, his face was that of a man in his 30s. It was the perfect age to combine maturity and handsomeness. At first glance, the bystanders only felt that he was 100 times more handsome than a movie star. If he were to be described as an old man, they would never be able to compare him to them. Yingkong was completely speechless by Wang Yuanshan. He had calculated everything, but he really hadn't expected that Wang Yuanshan would act like a hooligan and act shamelessly against him. For a moment, Yingkong was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He stood there, not knowing how to get out of the situation. Some of the disciples of the Jingyi school were laughing so hard that their intestines were about to break, but because of Wang Yuanshan's seniority, they didn't dare to laugh out loud. They just lowered their heads, and their shoulders kept shaking. When the disciples of the Xintian sect saw their master lose his composure, they also wanted to laugh secretly, but they didn't dare to laugh in front of Yinkong. They could only lower their heads and keep shaking their shoulders like the disciples of the Jingyi school. Li Yundong and Su Chan looked over and saw that both sides of the field were bowing their heads, as if there was a memorial service. All they needed was a bow, a second bow, and a third bow. The disciples of the Jingyi school didn't dare to laugh, but Su Chan didn't have this scruple. The little girl had already rolled around in Li Yundong's arms with laughter. She rubbed her stomach and said with a smile, "Oh, this world's top expert is too funny. I've never seen such a funny master. Is he also a great cultivator? How does he look like a great cultivator?" Li Yundong looked at Wang Yuanshan with flickering eyes. After a while he suddenly exclaimed in a low voice, "Ah, I understand. I finally understand what the highest realm of cultivation is." Su Chan suddenly stopped laughing and looked at Li Yundong curiously. "Ah, what is the highest realm of cultivation? Is it the oneness of heaven and man?" Li Yundong's eyes lit up with surprise and he said, "The oneness of heaven and man is just a process and a means. But after the oneness of heaven and man, there is the infinite void realm, and the infinite void realm secretly shows the meaning of being born into the world. Chaner, do you know that there are 3 realms of cultivators?" Su Chan raised her head obediently and looked at Li Yundong's excited expression as he comprehended the truth of cultivation. She couldn't help but feel a little happy for him. She said very teasingly, "I don't know. Yundong, please teach me." Li Yundong smiled and said, "There are 3 realms of cultivators. The first is to see mountains as mountains and water as water. The second is to see mountains as mountains and water. The third is to see mountains as mountains and water as water." Su Chan's eyes also lit up. "Ah, I understand. The first realm you mentioned is the realm of entering the secular world. The second is the realm of being born into the secular world. And the third is the realm of re-entering the secular world." Li Yundong laughed and rubbed the girl's long black hair hard. "Not bad, not bad. You're really my girl. You're so smart. Come over and kiss me." Su Chan giggled as she leaned over and planted a few kisses on Li Yundong's cheek. "It's because my master speaks in a way that's easy to understand. Unlike those Taoist classics, which are full of obscure poems that give me a headache just looking at them," Li Yundong said. "Wang Yuanshan is in the 3rd realm. He sees mountains as mountains and water as water. This is also the realm of Taoism. Taoism follows nature, and all methods follow one's heart. The Buddhist Dharma says that there is no self, no human, no living beings, and no longevity. It means that everything is empty, and only the true Dharma follows one's heart. When cultivators cultivate to the highest realm, they will see through everything and see through everything. The only thing they have to follow is their own heart. As long as their heart moves, heaven and earth will move." Su Chan blinked her eyes. She seemed to understand, but at the same time, she didn't quite understand. She said, "It sounds a little difficult to understand." Li Yundong laughed. "In fact, it's very simple. The highest realm of cultivation is to follow one's own heart. One's own heart is the true Dharma, and it is the only thing in the world that can be relied on and trusted." As he spoke, Li Yundong's face suddenly became serious, and he said seriously, "In fact, the highest realm of cultivation can be simplified into one word. Su Chan, today I will tell you the secret of the highest realm of cultivation. You must not tell it to anyone." Su Chan rarely saw Li Yundong like this. She quickly got up from her master's arms and sat opposite him seriously. She said with a serious face, "Yes, I will not tell anyone." Li Yundong nodded and said solemnly, "The highest realm of cultivation is to follow one's own heart. In short, there are 2 key words: follow one's heart. Therefore, when these 2 words are combined, they can represent the highest realm of cultivation." Before Su Chan could react, she said seriously, "One's obedience, one's heart put together." Suddenly her mouth opened wide, and she was dumbfounded. One's obedience, one's heart put together. Isn't that the word coward? The highest realm of cultivation is coward. Ah, coward. Coward? Yin Yundong, you didn't make a mistake, did you? Su Chan stammered and didn't know what to say. But when she saw that although Li Yundong's face was serious, his stomach was slightly twitching, she suddenly understood. She threw herself into Li Yundong's arms and scolded him with a smile. You're playing with me. You're so annoying. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He put his arms around the little girl's waist and said, I'm not lying to you. This is indeed the highest realm of cultivation. Look at the leader of the Jingyi school. He hasn't shown up from the beginning to the end. There is a deep water and fire outside, but he just sits on the fishing platform. If this isn't cowardice, then what is? Look at those cultivators who are being ordered around by the officials. Each of them can easily kill these officials, but they just admit defeat. What can you do to them? As the saying goes, if one man admits defeat, 10,000 people will be invincible. What a heroic statement, Su Chan said with a smile. Bah, you talk a lot of nonsense. But it seems that what you said makes a little sense. Li Yundong said with a smile. It's more than a little sense. It's 2, 3, 4 or 5 points. Don't underestimate the matter of admitting defeat. It's a skill. Look at Wang Yuanshan's cowardice. No one can do anything to him. Don't you think he's the best in the world? Well, do you want to fight him one-on-one? But no one dares to do it. If you ask him to break through the magic formation by force, he will immediately admit defeat and insist that you want to beat him with numbers and bully the elderly. What can you do to him? Moreover, this wasn't a formal occasion, so even if he admitted defeat, he wouldn't get any benefits. This Wang Yuanshan is very shrewd. He's amazing, really amazing. Su Chan pursed her lips and said disapprovingly, I hope he can defeat the other party in a fight. That would be interesting. Li Yundong shook his head with a smile. He looked at Wang Yuanshan with admiration and said, No, Wang Yuanshan told me one thing with his own actions. Su Chan asked curiously, What is it? Li Yundong said, This is that people should act according to their own strength. What is the Tao of nature? The Tao of nature is to act according to one's own strength. If one overestimates one's own strength, then one will be doomed to die. You only have the capacity to eat 2 bowls of rice, but you want to eat 20 bowls. If you don't die, who will? You obviously only have the strength of 100 kilograms, but you want to carry a burden of 500 kilograms. If you don't die, who will? Even if you cultivate to the golden immortal realm, you will still be invincible in the world. In the face of a powerful magic formation, even the most powerful golden immortal will shrink back. Su Chan blinked her eyes in understanding and looked at Wang Yuanshan. I see. But can this make the people of the Xintian sect retreat? This is unlikely, isn't it? As soon as she finished speaking, she saw Wang Yuanshan sigh softly and walk up to Inkong. He patted him on the shoulder like an old friend and said, Jimren, we are all disciples of the Jingyi school. Why do you have to do this? Everything in this world can be discussed. Why don't you invite your leader to Mount Longhu some other day? We can all sit down and have a good talk. What do you think? When Inkong saw Wang Yuanshan's hand coming for his shoulder, he wanted to dodge, but he felt that no matter how he dodged, Wang Yuanshan's palm would always land on his shoulder. It was as if an invisible hand had enveloped him, making him unable to move at all. His dull mind was taught a lesson by Wang Yuanshan. His face turned blue and red, and the corners of his eyes twitched for a long time. Then he gritted his teeth, turned his head, and shouted at his disciples, Let's go! This time, the disciples of the Jingyi school all cheered. Su Chan also widened her eyes and said in surprise, No way? You can retreat by admitting defeat? Isn't that too exaggerated? Hey, have you followed your heart today? Chapter 726. Su Chan looked at Inkong in disbelief, as if she couldn't understand why he would retreat when Wang Yuanshan had admitted defeat. However, Li Yundong laughed, as if all this was within his expectations. He said with a smile, This man named Inkong is quite decisive. It's wise to give up decisively at this time. Su Chan asked curiously, What do you mean? Li Yundong said with a smile. What else can we do if we don't give up? Can we still force Wang Yuanshan to enter the array? The strongest man in the world admitted defeat to you. If you think that he is really cowardly and doesn't have any real ability, then you are wrong. Anyway, it's already a huge gain to force Wang Yuanshan, who is said to be dead, to show up. Although we didn't test his true strength, we forced Wang Yuanshan to not dare to enter the array. This way, he can explain himself when he goes back. Su Chan nodded and said, I understand. It's the same as Ding Nan's previous idea of quitting while you're ahead. Li Yundong chuckled and said, Yes, that's right. The two of them muttered on the cliff. Seeing that Yinkong was depressed by Wang Yuanshan, the disciples of the Xintian sect had no choice but to return to the crowd. Yinkong glanced at Wang Yuanshan with resentment and secretly gnashed his teeth. His wishful thinking had been completely disrupted by this guy who had appeared out of nowhere. But as Li Yundong had said, he had not gained nothing. Anyway, this time it was just a visit to test the way. In other words, he had done a good job this time. Understanding this, Yinkong decisively stopped pestering Wang Yuanshan. He snorted angrily, cupped his hands to Zhang Ling, and said, Zhenren Zhang Ling, we want to worship our ancestors. Please lead the way. Zhang Ling also breathed a sigh of relief. Since the other party had proposed to publicly worship their ancestors, it meant that there would be no rebellion at the moment. Moreover, it was impossible for the other party not to know where the way was. But letting them lead the way could also be regarded as a disguised compromise. When a sect displayed enough strength, the other party would naturally be polite and follow the rules of etiquette. However, if Wang Yuanshan did not show himself, then sorry, they would first beat him into submission and then let him lead the way. That way, the nature of the situation would be completely different. No matter what, he had passed this hurdle. Zhang Ling knew very well that his sect leader was now in the most critical period of his closed-door training. Although he occasionally went out with his young spirit to pay attention to the world's events, he would never come out at this time to intervene in these matters. Even if there was a fierce battle at the foot of the mountain, he would not come out because he knew that as long as he was still there, the Jingyi school would not fall. But if he appeared rashly and was not strong enough, once he was knocked down, it would be a terrible disaster. Sometimes admitting cowardice was a kind of realm. A real man was flexible. A dragon could hide beneath the 9 earths, but it could also soar in the 9 heavens. At present, Zhang Ling could even count with her fingers that the Spring Festival would be coming in a few days. After the Spring Festival, it would officially be the beginning of spring. After the beginning of spring, there would be rain. In the universe, thunder began with water. When the rain fell, all things were nourished and full of vitality. Then, when the thunder fell, all things grew, snakes and insects moved, the chi of the earth rose, and the weather fell. It was the best golden time to cross the thunder tribulation. Any great cultivator with a little experience knew that the golden time of the day was in the morning, and the golden time of the year was in the spring. The golden time of the day for cultivation was the few hours in the morning, and the best time of the year for cultivation was the beginning of the spring festival, and the 2 solar terms after the spring equinox. After the spring festival, it was the spring equinox, and after the spring equinox was the Qingming festival. There was a poem from ancient times that said, during the Qingming festival the rain fell, and the passers-by on the road were sad. It could be seen that during the Qingming festival, there was an excess of rain, and the air was extremely humid. Cultivators were most afraid of moisture entering their bodies. Crossing the thunder tribulation in this season was undoubtedly a very stupid and naive behavior. After the Qingming festival came the grain rain, and as the name suggested, the rain became heavier. After the grain rain came the beginning of summer. No cultivator in the world would be so bored as to wait until summer to cross the thunder tribulation. The reason was very simple. Although summer was the season with the most vitality, once the thunder was too powerful, the risk of crossing the thunder tribulation would multiply, and the rewards would not necessarily multiply. As for autumn and winter, only a fool would cross the thunder tribulation in these 2 seasons. Autumn was the season when all things withered, and the vitality was weak. Crossing the thunder tribulation at this time would yield half the results with twice the effort. As for winter, there was no need to talk about it. There was no vitality at all. And even if one was struck by lightning, it would be for nothing. Therefore, at this time, the top golden cultivators in the world of cultivation had long set their eyes on the spring equinox and the spring festival. They were all rubbing their palms and preparing to cross the thunder tribulation. From their point of view, as long as they passed the thunder tribulation, their cultivation would greatly improve, or even double. Even if they passed the 9 stages of thunder tribulation, they would directly leap into the realm of the 9th heaven of the fairy realm. Even if they were at least a human immortal, once they became an immortal in the world, it would really be 9 transformations of carefree Dao fruit, 3,000 achievements, becoming an immortal, Jindan Jade Slip, Clear Edict, Crane riding Cloud Chariot to Paradise. If they did not have enough fun in the human world, they would continue to play. If one day they were tired of it, they could ascend to the 9 heavenly nights heaven at any time and go to the immortal world to watch the fun. From then on, they would no longer have anything to do with the human world. For inner disciples like Zhang Tianshi, who had started cultivating in their mother's womb, their only purpose of cultivation was to ascend to become an immortal and go to the immortal world. Therefore, in their eyes, this kind of power struggle between the Xiantian sect and the Longhu sect was just a small matter, far less important than crossing the thunder tribulation. Therefore, if cultivators like them were preparing to cross the thunder tribulation, they would prepare in advance, ignoring the outside world and wholeheartedly focus on crossing the thunder tribulation. Only a rookie in the cultivation world like Li Yundong would run around and fight for his life without preparing for the thunder tribulation at all. Therefore, Zhang Ling also knew that if Wang Yuanshan held a grudge this time and did not show himself, then they would be in deep trouble. Longhu Mountain might even have to change hands. Even if it was not easy to change hands, if Celestial Master Zhang was alarmed and delayed his lightning tribulation, then they would not be able to afford it. At this time, Zhang Ling saw that the other side had admitted defeat, so she quickly took advantage of the situation and walked down the mountain with Yinkong without losing her manners. When she passed by Ding Nan, she looked at her with appreciation, bowed slightly and said, "Jimren Ding, I wonder if you are interested in going to our ancestral court to have a look?" Ding Nan was overjoyed when she heard this. She was a very utilitarian woman, always thinking about strengthening her strength and power. In her opinion, only by constantly growing stronger could she ensure that such a happy life would not leave her. Therefore, she had come to Mount Longhu to show her face in front of the heroes of the world. She hadn't expected that after being delayed along the way, the Jingyi school would accidentally fall into her hands. Ding Nan nodded quickly. For a moment, she didn't even care about being reserved, and said with a smile, "The Tao of the world originates from the Righteous One. I want to pay my respects to the 3 pure emperors." Ding Nan's flattery made everyone present look proud for a moment. Even the disciples of the Xiantian sect who had a grudge with Ding Nan looked at her a few more times, as if they felt that this woman looked much more pleasing to the eye at this time. When Su Chan, who was on the top of the mountain, heard Ding Nan's words, she couldn't help wrinkling her nose and saying, "Ding Nan, how can you flatter me like this? I can't stand it." However, Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "This is not flattery. The Tao of the world originates from the Righteous One. Although this sentence is too flattering, it also makes some sense. After all, the current Jingyi school has integrated many cultivation sects from ancient times to the present. Judging from the history of Chinese Taoism, there is no Taoist sect earlier than the Jingyi school. In terms of influence, the Jingyi school deserves this sentence." Su Chan asked curiously, "Really? I remember watching TV saying that the martial arts of the world originate from Shaolin, but I've never heard of the saying that the Tao of the world originates from the Righteous One." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Your master taught you everything you know. Your master hates the Jingyi school to death. How could he say such things to you? Besides, can you take it seriously on TV? The saying that the martial arts of the world originates from Shaolin is a real falsehood. This is a sentence made up by Jin Yong. Without Jin Yong and the movie Shaolin Temple, the Shaolin Temple would never have reached such a level and scale. In Jin Yong's view, Chinese martial arts are powerful in ancient times, and the more modern they are, the worse they are. But in fact it is the opposite. The peak of our Chinese martial arts was at the end of the Qing dynasty and the beginning of the Republic of China. This was the peak of Chinese martial arts in this chaotic world that had not been seen in 1,000 years. There were Li Shuwen, the divine spear, Li Luoning, the divine fist, Guo Yinshan, who conquered the world with half-step bursting boxing, Dong Haichuan, the eunuch master, Cheng Tinghua, the 8 diagrams master, and Li Tsuani, the great master of national martial arts who was invincible before the age of 70. Not to mention Sun Lutang, the world's first-class martial arts master, Shang Yunxiang, Xue Ding, and others who are as famous as Sun Lutang. What is the Shaolin Temple doing at this time? The Shaolin Temple of these bald donkeys has been burned down. Have you ever heard of any Shaolin Temple in modern times that has a famous martial monk? 100 years ago, the most famous martial monk of Buddhism was Master Haideng. Unfortunately, he has nothing to do with the Shaolin Temple. Su Chan clapped her hands and said angrily, "It turns out that TV is all lies. I won't watch it in the future." Li Yundong laughed. "You can't stand it?" Su Chan pulled a face at Li Yundong. "The TV cheated me of my feelings. I don't want it anymore. I don't want it anymore." Li Yundong laughed. He really loved Su Chan's naivety. If it had been anyone else, it would have been creepy and pretentious. But Su Chan had an indescribable innocence and charm. The combination of these two temperaments made Li Yundong so infatuated with her that he could not extricate himself. Li Yundong smiled and patted Su Chan's cheek. Okay. Remember what you said. If I find out that you're secretly watching TV when we get back, you'll be punished according to the family rules." Su Chan stuck out her tongue and suddenly felt a little regretful. She looked at Li Yundong timidly and said, Can't I watch it on the computer?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Just as he was about to speak to her, he saw that the disciples of the Xiantian sect and the Jingyi school, who had been at daggers drawn, had all gone down the mountain. Ding Nan was also following behind the team. Her disciples were also tactful. At this time, they finally stopped shouting the shameless slogan. However, Song Guohua was really a bit quick-witted. He made up a crooked poem on the spot and asked the disciples to shout loudly. The Tao of the world originates from Jingyi, and the success of cultivation lies in Wuhua. The Great Way is everywhere, and the Jimren of the world is one family. Although his poem wasn't very standard, the disciples of the two sects, young and old, all smiled when they heard it. They were very satisfied, and the anger from before dissipated a lot. Inkong even started chatting with Zhang Ling with a smile. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to tell that the two sides had almost killed each other just now. Li Yundong looked at them, who seemed to be harmonious on the surface, but in fact, were full of honeyed words and daggers. He shook his head secretly. Su Chan didn't notice this. She pulled Li Yundong's sleeve, pointed to the group of people and said curiously, I think I see Hardadef." When Li Yundong had fought with the Japanese before, all his attention had been focused on his opponent, and there were thousands of people on the sidelines. How could he have noticed Hardadef hiding in the crowd? Even just now, his attention was focused on Ding Nan, Wang Yuanshan and the others, who would pay attention to the people on the sidelines. Hardadef? Li Yundong was stunned. Why is he here? Where is he? But at this time, the group of people had already gone down the mountain and was far away. How could he see clearly who was hiding in the crowd in the woods? Su Chan hesitated for a moment and said, "I can't see him anymore. Maybe I was wrong." But at that time, his back looked quite similar. Li Yundong smiled and said, "I saw Alba. It seems that she is doing well with Ding Nan. Fortunately, Ding Nan still has some humanity and didn't do anything to her." Su Chan rolled her eyes and looked at the field again. Suddenly, she didn't know when there had been another person on the field. This person's dress was fluttering, and she was long like a waterfall. There was a vermilion beauty mole between her eyebrows, and she had a small oval face. Her appearance was stunning. This beauty stood still and stared at Wang Yuanshan, who was on the field. Her eyes were full of hidden bitterness and infatuation, like a pool of autumn water. This person was none other than Ao Wushuang. Chapter 727. At a glance, Su Chan saw that her master had appeared in the field. She was shocked and couldn't help but let out a low cry. Li Yundong, who was beside her, quickly covered Su Chan's mouth gently, lest her voice be a little louder, and scare the two of them away. At this time, Li Yundong's gossipy soul was burning. He was looking forward to the scene of this lonely man and woman meeting for 10 years. Su Chan held Li Yundong's big hand tightly with both hands, and looked at Wang Yuanshan and Ao Wushuang without blinking. She was looking forward to the two of them getting back together, because in her impression, her master had never shown a really happy smile. Sometimes, even if she smiled at her, it was a kind of love and doting. She could still see the deep bitterness and loneliness in the depths of her eyes. If only master could get back together with grandmaster. The little girl murmured unconsciously in a low voice. Although she had complained that Wang Yuanshan had not left any news for Ao Wushuang in the past 10 years, she still subconsciously hoped that her master could be happy. At this time, Ao Wushuang looked at Wang Yuanshan with an extremely complicated expression. There was ecstasy, shock, resentment, anger, tenderness, and infatuation in her eyes. Li Yundong and Su Chan, who were watching from a distance, couldn't imagine how a person's expression could show such complicated emotions in an instant. For a moment, the empty side peak was extremely quiet. Wang Yuanshan and Ao Wushuang looked at each other quietly. No one spoke, only the wind on the top of the mountain whimpered, and it was silent. After a long time, Ao Wushuang said in a trembling voice, "Don't you want to say something?" Wang Yuanshan looked at Ao Wushuang quietly. After a moment of silence, he sighed softly and said, "Your stealth and hiding skills are still so powerful. I didn't notice your existence at all." Ao Wushuang smiled sadly. "It's been 10 years. Is that all you want to say to me?" Wang Yuanshan said slowly, "Yes, 10 years. 10 years have passed in the blink of an eye, but I feel like only a few days have passed." Tears kept rolling in Ao Wushuang's eyes. This strong, conceited, and arrogant woman was no different from an ordinary woman. Ao Wushuang said in a trembling voice, "But for me, every day is as long as a year. Do you know what it feels like to live like a year? Since you've been alive for the past 10 years, why didn't you come looking for me? With your strength, is there any place in the world that can imprison you?" Wang Yuanshan raised his head and sighed softly. "Wushuang, the world is a big cage. Even if I get out, I will just be jumping from one cage to another. What's the difference?" Ao Wushuang trembled with excitement and shouted, "There's a difference. I'm not in your confinement." Wang Yuanshan lowered his head and looked at Ao Wushuang with gentle eyes. He said softly, "Wushuang, look at your childish words. Aren't you and I in this world? We are all trapped in this cage, so we should be thinking about how to get out of this cage, instead of being obsessed with this cage." Ao Wushuang couldn't believe her ears and eyes. This man whom she had held onto a glimmer of hope and waited bitterly for 10 years. Was he really Wang Yuanshan? How could he say such a thing? Ao Wushuang finally couldn't hold back her tears. They dripped down like pearls from a broken necklace. She sobbed and said, "Wang Yuanshan, have you forgotten everything? Have you forgotten what you once said to me? Don't tell me you've forgotten your oath. Have you forgotten that you will stay with me until the end of time?" Wang Yuanshan was silent for a while. Then he smiled softly and said, "Wushuang, the Wang Yuanshan you know is dead. He died when he was caught 10 years ago. Forget him. The one standing in front of you now is not Wang Yuanshan." After that he sighed softly, turned around and walked down the mountain. Ao Wushuang had never expected that she would get such an answer after waiting for 10 years. She only felt that her heart had been crushed into powder in an instant. She cried so hard that she could hardly stand. Su Chan couldn't bear it anymore. At this time, Su Chan couldn't help it anymore. She rushed down the mountain and hugged Ao Wushuang. While crying, she said, "Master, don't cry, don't cry. This heartless man is not worth your tears." Ao Wushuang grabbed Su Chan at once, threw her head into her arms, and began to cry like a child. The sound of her crying was so miserable that it really made people feel sad. But Wang Yuanshan seemed to have a heart of stone. He didn't look back in the midst of the crying, and slowly walked down the mountain. Su Chan looked at his figure with tears in her eyes and couldn't help shouting, "Wang Yuanshan, you are ungrateful. I hate you." Wang Yuanshan paused slightly, but then he continued to walk forward. After a few steps, his figure disappeared in an instant. Li Jiandong watched this scene silently from the cliff. His burning desire for gossip had long since disappeared. At this time, his heart was extremely heavy. For a moment, he didn't know what to say or do. He couldn't help thinking of the lyrics of 10 years. 10 years ago, I didn't know you. You didn't belong to me. We were still the same. We accompanied a stranger and walked through the streets that we gradually became familiar with. 10 years later, we are friends and can greet each other. But that kind of gentleness can no longer be found a reason to hug. In the end, lovers inevitably become friends. The melody of this song rang uncontrollably in Li Jiandong's mind. He couldn't help but think, will Su Chan and I become like this in the future? As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Li Jiandong clenched his fists fiercely. No, absolutely not. No one can separate me from her. Thinking of this, Li Jiandong couldn't help but jump to the top of the mountain. He came to Su Chan's side, gently pressed his hand on her shoulder, and said softly, "Get up. Let's go back." At this time, Ao Wushuang was devastated and cried so hard that she fainted in Su Chan's arms. The little girl wiped her tears and stood up with her master in her arms. She sobbed and said, "Yundong, I'm so sad." Li Jiandong stretched out his hand lovingly and wiped away the tears on Su Chan's face. He comforted her softly. Maybe Wang Yuanshan has his own difficulties? Su Chan's eyes lit up and she suddenly said in a hurry, "Yes, there must be some difficulties. Yundong, don't you think so? It must be like this. Master must have made a mistake, right?" When Li Jiandong said this, he didn't believe it himself. In his opinion, was there anything more important than being with the person he loved? Difficulties? Even if the sky fell down, the two of them would die together. *CK the difficulties. But these words could only be said in his heart. At the moment he could persuade her as long as he could, even if she knew that he was lying to her. With Su Chan's intelligence, it was impossible for her not to know that Li Jiandong was lying to her. But the little girl would rather be fooled and then comfort her master with it. Li Yundong smiled gently, nodded in self-deception and said, "Well, he must have his reasons. Let's ask him again later. But, in my opinion, if Wang Yuanshan doesn't want to say it himself, I'm afraid it's useless no matter who asks." Su Chan felt much better. She hugged Ao Wushuang and said, "Yundong, let's go back. I don't want to stay here. I don't like it here." Li Jiandong nodded and said, "Well, let's go." The two of them took the unconscious Ao Wushuang all the way back. After leaving Mount Longhu, they flew to Tianan City. By the time they got home, it was already late at night. After Su Chan put Ao Wushuang on the bed, she sat by the bed and looked at her master quietly. She had never seen her master have such a weak side, which made her feel so sad as if someone had pinched her with their hands. Li Jiandong accompanied her by her side. After a long time, Su Chan turned around and said softly to Li Jiandong, "Yundong, I'll sit with master for a while. Speaking of which, it seems that I've never been with her quietly for a night. Let me be alone with her, okay?" Li Jiandong nodded, kissed the little girl's forehead gently, and said softly, "Well, don't hurt your body. I'll go back first." As he said this, Li Jiandong walked to the door and suddenly turned around. He said gently, "Chaner, don't worry. No matter what happens in the future, I won't leave you. I'm not Wang Yuanshan." Su Chan turned her head and looked at Li Jiandong in a daze. Somehow, tears flowed down her cheeks. She smiled, wiped her tears and nodded hard. Li Jiandong nodded and smiled at Su Chan lovingly, then went out the door. After going out, Li Jiandong raised his head and sighed. Just as he was about to go to his room, he saw Zi Yuan looking at him with sparkling eyes in the corridor. She asked curiously, "What's wrong with you? Why do you look like you're going to be separated forever? I seem to have heard you mention my master's name just now." Li Jiandong suddenly hesitated. He didn't know whether he should tell Zi Yuan about Wang Yuanshan or not. If she knew that Wang Yuanshan was not dead, he really didn't know what kind of thoughts she would have. But what kind of person was Zi Yuan? She was one of the most intelligent women in the world. Under her observation, she thought for a moment, and then her breathing immediately became rapid. Her eyes widened, and her voice trembled slightly. "Do you have news about my master? Is he really not dead?" Li Jiandong sighed and said, "Yes, I went to Mount Longhu with Su Chan before, and happened to meet the overseas forces of Jingyi School. The people of Jingyi School were forced to do nothing, so Zhang Kongyan forced Wang Yuanshan out." Hearing this, Zi Yuan's body swayed slightly. Li Jiandong immediately took a step forward, held her with both hands and asked softly, "Are you all right?" Zi Yuan seemed to be in a trance. She calmed down, forced a smile at Li Jiandong and said, "I am fine. Let me be alone for a while." As she said this, she staggered back to her room. Zi Yuan entered the opposite door and went to her room. After closing the door, she leaned her back against the door as if she had lost all her strength. Her body slowly slid down. Unknowingly, her eyes were already full of tears. "Master, you really didn't die? If you didn't die, why did you abandon us back then?" Zi Yuan covered her mouth with one hand and sobbed silently. But Zi Yuan was Zi Yuan after all. She was different from Ao Wushuang, who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Ao Wushuang's emotions, which had accumulated for 10 years, burst out like a volcanic eruption, and she cried until she fainted. However, Zi Yuan silently shed tears for a while, then wiped her tears and stood up gracefully. Zi Yuan was a gentle person. When she suddenly learned of Wang Yuanshan's whereabouts, she only had questions in her heart, but there was no resentment or doubt. Her eyes were blurred, and she whispered to herself, "Master, do you know? The psalms you once told me have almost all come true now. But when I completely believe what you have to say, I know that you are not dead. What do you want me to do?" For a moment, Zi Yuan couldn't help but think of her master's figure in the past. Those scenes flashed before her eyes like a horse lantern. Every day she spent with her master was as ordinary as a clear stream in the mountains, like a breeze in the jungle. But after these scenes, she had received the news that Ruan Hongling, the successor of Jindan's stage, had appeared in the Taoist temple. From the beginning, she had met Li Yunyang, witnessed him being struck by lightning, and taught him cultivation step by step. Then, she had been willing to destroy 2 magic treasures for him to survive the divine tribulation. The two of them got along with each other bit by bit. There were memories of earth-shattering battles, family trifles, and warm memories of the two of them sitting side by side in the kitchen. They were like mountains, rivers, and rivers. There were times when they were calm and low, and there were also ups and downs. Unconsciously, Zi Yuan sat down in front of the desk, picked up the inkstone on the inkstone in front of the desk, and gently ground the ink. Then, she gently picked up the brush on the brush rack, dipped it in the ink, and unconsciously wrote their names on the paper in front of her. At first, Zi Yuan was still writing, Wang Yuanshan, and Li Yunyang in turn. But then, when Zi Yuan had unconsciously written the whole page, she suddenly came to her senses. At a glance, she saw that Wang Yuanshan's name had only appeared a few times at the beginning, and then the rest of the paper was full of Li Yunyang's name. Looking at this piece of paper, Zi Yuan was lost in thought for a moment. Her eyes were blurred, and she was actually crazy. Chapter 728. Zi Yuan faintly looked at the note she had written, and was a little obsessed. Just as she was in a daze, there was a sudden knock on the door. Soon, the sudden knock on the door awakened Zi Yuan. She hurriedly crumpled the paper full of words into a ball. Then, she watched as the ball of paper suddenly spontaneously ignited in her hand. After burning it to ashes and throwing it into the trash can, she felt relieved. She walked to the door and gently opened it. Ziyuan looked at the door nervously, only to see that the person standing at the door was not the man who had made her heart beat wildly, but her shimmy, Wan Hongling. Wan Hongling looked at her Shiji strangely. She had rarely seen her Shiji panic and carefully hide her expression. She looked into the room curiously, then frowned and fanned herself with her hands. Is there a fire in your room? Ziyuan calmed down and gradually recovered from her panic. She asked lightly, what's the matter? Although Wan Hongling felt strange, she did not suspect anything. She entered Ziyuan's room and opened the window to ventilate the room. Then, she sat casually on the edge of the bed and looked at her toes, as if hesitating whether to say what she wanted to say. Seeing her like this, Ziyuan smiled and said, did you come to my room so late to study the size of your feet? Wan Hongling raised her head and suddenly said quickly, Shiji Ziyuan, we can't go on like this. Ziyuan asked curiously, how? Wan Hongling said with red eyes, I mean, we are being bullied. You have to find a way to repair the two great treasures of our Jingyi school. Otherwise, we will lose the position of the head of Linggong sect sooner or later. Ziyuan didn't speak. She lowered her head in silence. After a while, she raised her head and said, you should know. The difficulty of repairing these two powerful magical treasures is no different from rebuilding them. It's too difficult and takes too much time. It's impossible. Wan Hongling said anxiously, but we should try. Yes, I know it's too difficult, but Shiji, I really can't stand the feeling of being humiliated in front of everyone. If the Japanese hadn't come to mess things up this time, and if Li Yundong hadn't driven the Japanese away with great power, can you imagine what the situation would have been like? Ziyuan naturally knew that her outcome and fate would be very terrible. A young woman like her would be imprisoned and face the wall. From then on, she would have to face the green lamp and the withered wall, ending her life. Ziyuan was not afraid of loneliness and solitude. She was originally a woman with a light temperament, and was not involved in the affairs of the world. If facing the wall and being imprisoned could eventually help her achieve the Tao and ascend to become an immortal, she could even stay at home for the rest of her life and never leave that small Taoist temple. But now, there was still a trace of reluctance in her heart. She was still thinking about the psalm that her master had left for her. This psalm was her life's destiny that her master had left for her. She had already uncovered most of it, but there were still some parts that she had yet to uncover. At the very least, she wanted to know the final answer and outcome before she faced all of this. Then she would have no regrets. Moreover, behind this idea, there was a faint trace of reluctance. She was already somewhat used to such a life. If she suddenly left this place, would she be reluctant to leave? Would she regret it? Would she be sad? Would she be reluctant to do so? She didn't know. Deep in her heart, Ziyuan didn't even want to think about this question. Sometimes, she was strong and calm, but sometimes, even if she knew that she would be hurt, she would be like an ostrich, unwilling to face these problems. Looking at the silent Ziyuan, Wan Hongling became more and more anxious, and her voice became louder. Shiji, master doesn't care about us, but don't you care? You. At this time, Ziyuan suddenly raised her head and looked at Wan Hongling with a complicated look in her eyes. She interrupted her softly, Hongling master. He's not dead. Wan Hongling's voice stopped abruptly, and the expression on her face froze. After a long time, her anxiety turned to shock, and then from shock to anger. She felt that she had been deceived, and a wave of anger rushed to the top of her head. Master is not dead. Then why hasn't he cared about us for the past 10 years? Then why would he rather watch us being bullied than come out to help us? The more Wan Hongling spoke, the angrier she became. Her chest rose and fell violently as she shouted, how could he do this? It's fine if he left us alone for 10 years. But how could he watch his own sect be bullied like this? What kind of master is he? Ziyuan sighed softly and said, Hongling, master must have his own difficulties. Don't talk about it. At least we know that master is still alive. This is good news, isn't it? Wan Hongling's eyes were red, and her voice trembled slightly. Good news? For me. The good news now is that we need to repair those two powerful magical weapons as soon as possible. Ziyuan didn't speak again. She shook her head and said, "Don't think about it. It's too difficult." Wan Hongling stared at Ziyuan unwillingly. After a while, she stamped her feet and rushed out of the room. Soon, Ziyuan looked at Wan Hongling's figure and opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. However, she quickly swallowed her words and sighed faintly. She sat quietly in the room alone, letting the cold moonlight shine on her body, projecting a lonely figure beside the bed. It wasn't until the next day that the jade rabbit quietly left the sky, and the golden crow rose from the sky again. Ziyuan was shocked to realize that the next day had already arrived. Ziyuan was slightly shocked. She felt that the warm sunlight was warming her body. She stood up gently and walked out of the door to prepare breakfast. However, early in the morning, she saw Wan Hongling rushing to the opposite door angrily. Ziyuan opened her mouth and shouted, but Wan Hongling rushed out without looking back. She sighed and shook her head. At this time, Wan Hongling rushed to Li Yundong's room angrily. She couldn't stand her Shiji's sometimes gentle personality. She wanted to ask Li Yundong for help and explain this matter to him. In order to help you get through the heavenly tribulation, Ziyuan broke the glass mirror and the purple gold luo jade plate. Do you know that? Even if you didn't know, now that you know, don't you think you should do something? Do you know how badly Shiji was bullied before? These words echoed in Wan Hongling's mind all night. She had been hesitating whether she should go to her master or Li Yundong. But after thinking about it, Wan Hongling finally chose Li Yundong, who was chivalrous and kept his promise, instead of the master who had a closer relationship with her, but had left them alone for 10 years. Wan Hongling also had the key to Li Yundong's door. She opened the door roughly and rushed in. Her posture and movements made the little foxes who were practicing in the room early in the morning turn their heads to look at her in surprise. Wan Hongling ignored their gazes and rushed all the way to Li Yundong's room. She broke in without knocking on the door. But as soon as she entered, Wan Hongling smelled a strong fragrance of medicine. Li Yundong, who was wrapped up like a mummy, was lying quietly on the bed. Wan Hongling was stunned. Only then did she come to her senses. Li Yundong, who was invincible in the world, was still seriously injured and unconscious. Wan Hongling's eyes darkened. She bit her lips gently with her snow-white teeth and complained in a low voice. "Aren't you made of iron? Why don't you stand up quickly?" As she was speaking in a low voice, she heard a voice coming from behind her. "Hey, what's the matter?" Wan Hongling looked back and saw Li Yundong standing behind her, looking at her with a smile. His body was intact, and he didn't look injured at all. Wan Hongling didn't come to her senses for a moment. She was startled and unconsciously exclaimed, which made the little foxes in the living room laugh. But Wan Hongling quickly reacted. She rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said angrily, "You're injured. Why don't you be quiet?" Li Yundong cried out, feeling wronged. "Who was the one who wanted me to stand up immediately just now?" Wan Hongling blushed and argued, "I just think it's a little strange that you've been lying like this all this time. Aren't you always full of energy?" Li Yundong laughed. "Just take it as a vacation. Can't I rest for 2 days?" Wan Hongling had gotten used to bickering with Li Yundong in the past. For a moment, she forgot the purpose of her visit. She blushed and put on a posture, as if she wanted to fight with Li Yundong for 300 rounds. However, Li Yundong smiled and said, Okay, stop it. Why are you looking for me?" Wan Hongling opened her mouth, but she hesitated. She stared at Li Yundong carefully. Just as she was about to speak, she heard a cell phone vibrating on the desk in Li Yundong's room. Li Yundong showed an apologetic expression to Wan Hongling. He picked up the phone and glanced at it, only to see that it was a call from Lu Feier. As soon as Li Yundong picked up the phone, Lu Feier's clear voice came through. "Thank God. I thought you had disappeared again. Hey, where are you now?" Li Yundong chuckled. "Me? I'm back in Tianan City." Lu Feier said angrily, "You're so annoying. You didn't even say goodbye before you left. It took us a long time to find you. I thought something had happened to you. You didn't answer the phone before." Li Yundong smiled and said, "There was something urgent, so I left in a hurry. By the way, how's the crew? Where's President Chow? Is she okay?" Lu Feier's voice suddenly changed, and she said very seriously, "Do you still remember Sister Chow? Li Yundong, I tell you you're in trouble, big trouble." Li Yundong was stunned, and his heart trembled slightly. He thought to himself, could something have happened to Chow Kefi? No way. Chapter 729. Li Yundong's voice suddenly became low. He glanced at Ruan Hongling and showed an apologetic expression. Then he walked to the side and asked in a low voice, "What happened?" Lu Feier sighed, and her voice suddenly became very helpless. "You'll know when you come." Li Yundong frowned. "Is it urgent?" Lu Feier said, "It's very urgent. It's best if you can come in the next second." Li Yundong's heart tightened. He nodded and said, "Then I'll be there as soon as possible." Bubble. Book. After putting down the phone, Li Yundong said to Ruan Hongling, "Hongling, I have something urgent to do. I'll go out for a while." Ruan Hongling sighed and saw that Li Yundong had disappeared in the blink of an eye. She was so angry that she stamped her feet and said angrily, "You're so annoying. My business is more urgent." As she spoke, she looked indignantly at Li Yundong, who was unconscious on the bed, and made a threatening gesture. If Li Yundong hadn't been seriously injured, she would have punched him already. Ruan Hongling glared at Li Yundong angrily for a long time before she stamped her feet and rushed out of the room. Li Yundong, who was rushing to Hainan, didn't know what was on Ruan Hongling's mind. He flew quickly with his young spirit body and found a place where no one was around to land. Then he rushed to the Exine Hotel. When he arrived at the door of the hotel, he called Lu Feier and asked, "Where are you now?" Lu Feier's voice was obviously stunned. "You're back? So fast?" Li Yundong said in a low voice. "Well, are you still in the room or in the studio?" Lu Feier hesitated for a moment and said, "We're in the room. Come quickly." Li Yundong hung up the phone without hesitation and rushed to Lu Feier and Chow Kefi's room. He pressed his hand on the doorknob and turned it, only to find that the door was not locked. So he pushed the door open and walked in. As soon as he pushed the door open, Li Yundong heard a pa-pa-pa sound and several black shadows rushed toward him. Li Yundong was shocked. Although he was only at the Yang spirit realm at this time, he still had the experience of fighting and his spiritual power. At this time, he immediately subconsciously pushed his Jinqi forward, pushing it out like an invisible wall. The black shadows were immediately sent flying back. Puff, puff, puff. The screams of a few women could be heard. At this time, Li Yundong took a closer look and saw more than a dozen people standing in the room. Some were holding firecrackers, some were wearing pointed hats, and some were holding toy trumpets. But no matter what they were holding, they all seemed to be frozen. They were staring in one direction, not at Li Yundong, but at the two women in front of him. Of the two girls, one of them had a cream cake covering her face. Her face couldn't be seen, and the cream cake obviously couldn't hold on any longer. It slowly slid down her face, revealing a sluggish face. Her eyes looked as if she had just been raped by 100 burly men, full of grievance and resentment. Li Yundong's eyes widened. For a moment, he couldn't recognize who the woman with the cream cake on her face was. But when he looked to the side, he was shocked. The other woman was none other than Chow Kefi. At this time, Chow Kefi's chest was covered with a strawberry chocolate cake. Her towering breasts provided a good angle for the cake. The cake did not slide down for a while, but the strawberries on it kept sliding down the ravine of her chest endlessly. Li Yundong was dumbfounded and stammered, What's going on?" He turned his head and glanced at the other people in the room, only to see that the other members of the crew were in the room. Some were actors, some were stage managers, and Chris was among them. She was also wearing a clown hat and holding a firecracker in her hand. Her head was very low, but Li Yundong could tell from her shrugging shoulders that she was having a hard time holding back her laughter. Li Yundong glanced around, but no one answered him. Everyone seemed to be under a spell of silence. Li Yundong raised his voice. "No one can tell me what's going on here? Seeing his surprised look, Lu Feier was so aggrieved that she almost cried. She quickly wiped her face with her hand and said angrily, "Hey, it seems that I should be the one shouting, right?" Li Yundong glanced at her, only to see that this popular idol was like a snowman with a face full of cream. She looked ridiculous. He couldn't help laughing out loud. "Did you call me here in a hurry just to ask me to dress you up? Not bad. Your fans will like your new look." Lu Feier was seething with anger. She quickly grabbed the cream on her face and flung it at Li Yundong. "You bastard! You're pissing me off. Don't you know how to be kind to a woman?" Lu Feier said. Seeing that she was throwing the cream at him, Li Yundong immediately changed his yang spirit to yin spirit, and the cream passed through his body. He chuckled and said, "It's your own fault. Why did you lie to me? Look, now the retribution is coming, isn't it?" When Lu Feier saw that the cream she had thrown had passed through Li Yundong's body, she suddenly widened her eyes. Her dark eyes looked even more ridiculous on a face full of cream. But after staring for a while, tears suddenly welled up in her eyes. After a while, she quickly wiped her tears with both hands. When Li Yundong saw the girl crying, he felt a headache coming on. He looked at Chao Kefi, who was beside him, as if asking for help. He saw that Chao Kefi was wiping the cream on her chest with a handkerchief. When she saw him looking at her, she rolled her eyes. Li Yundong saw that when she was wiping the cream, her chest was surging, which was really magnificent. He secretly took a breath of cold air, and didn't dare to look at her anymore. He turned to Lu Feier and said with a wry smile, "Hey, no way. You're crying now? I haven't cried yet. I came here in a hurry. I didn't expect that you would arrange a sneak attack. Fortunately, I reacted quickly. Otherwise, hee." Li Yundong didn't say the following words. Otherwise, if the news that Invincible Li, who had defeated the Japanese cultivation world with his own strength, and was known as the Fighting Heavenly Master, had been smashed beyond recognition by 2 pieces of cake got out, he was afraid that it would become the biggest joke in the Chinese cultivation world. Those Japanese people would be so angry that they would commit suicide the next day. Thinking of this, a thought suddenly flashed through Li Yundong's mind. What will those Japanese do when they go back? Will they be willing? Will they keep their promise? But he quickly chased this thought out of his mind. He waved at Chris, who was not far away, and kept snickering with her head down. "Hey Chris, can you explain to me how all this happened?" Chris asked. "Can you explain to me how all this happened?" Chris raised her head and looked at Li Yundong timidly, then at Lu Feier and Chao Kefi, who were embarrassed. She couldn't help but burst into laughter, but she immediately stopped laughing. She came to Li Yundong's side with a straight face, coughed dryly and said, "Master, today is Sister Chao's birthday, so we want to celebrate, but you are not here," so Lu Feier suggested. Lu Feier didn't wait for her to finish and immediately said loudly, "Hey, you proposed to hit him with a cake." Chris's face changed greatly. She quickly waved her hands and said, No, it wasn't me, I didn't." Lu Feier said angrily, "You were the one who suggested it. You said that it was popular in your country." Chris looked at Li Yundong with a terrified face. Like a child who had done something bad, she lowered her head and murmured, I just said it casually. The decision is up to you." Lu Feier pounced on Chris with her creamy hands and tried hard to wipe Chris's face. "You are the initiator, the accomplice, and the main culprit. You can't escape the punishment of the law." At this time, Chris had completely forgotten that she had also inhaled the divine aura of elixir. Her physique had long surpassed that of ordinary people by dozens of times. This blonde foreign girl was obviously living a good life in the crew. She screamed and played hide-and-seek with Lu Feier in the room. Watching from the side, Li Yundong felt both warm and funny. He couldn't help but think of what he had encountered before. The continuous fierce battles in Mount Longhu seemed to be very far away from him at this time. At this time, the heaviness brought to him by Wang Yuanshan and Ao Wushuang's 10 years of acquaintance also slowly drifted away. He looked at the frolicking Chris and Lu Feier with a smile. He glanced to the side and saw that Chao Kefi was wiping her chest while looking at the 2 of them with a smile. Her eyes were soft and warm, as if she enjoyed such a life very much. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he thought to himself, Chow Kefi doesn't seem to be completely controlled by the mystical silver fox, but this day will come sooner or later. What should I think of to help her keep her soul? Chow Kefi seemed to notice Li Yundong's gaze. She looked up at him, and her cheeks immediately turned red. Li Yundong saw that such a beautiful woman was so shy that she lowered her head. It was really beautiful. He immediately withdrew his gaze, coughed dryly, and said seriously, Sister Chow, happy birthday. Chow Kefi calmed herself down. She raised her head and said with a smile, Do you have any birthday present to prepare? Li Yundong came in a hurry. So how could he have any birthday present? He thought for a moment and said with a wry smile, Is a happy birthday enough? Chow Kefi stared at Li Yundong with infatuation in her eyes. She smiled softly and said, Yes, this is the best birthday present I have ever received. As soon as she finished speaking, Lu Feier shouted exaggeratedly, Sister Chow, it's not fair. I gave you such a valuable gift, but you didn't even say that to me. I said happy birthday, without any capital, and your bones became a little lighter. You don't value love more than friends, do you? I protest, I complain. I want to go to the crew to impeach you. Most of the people in the crew knew about the scandal between Chow Kefi and Li Yundong, and they all laughed. Chow Kefi's face turned red from the laughter. She flew into a rage out of shame, and pounced on Lu Feier, scratching and scratching. I'll let you say it, I'll let you say it. For a moment, there was constant laughter in the room. Li Yundong saw two beautiful women, one big and one small, shouting and rolling together. They were really fat and thin, lively and fragrant. Li Yundong looked at Chow Kefi, who was playing with Lu Feier, and suddenly said with emotion in his heart, Sister Chow, if I help you keep your soul and memory, what do you think of this birthday present? As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Li Yundong unconsciously smiled bitterly. It's really difficult to fight with the mystical silver fox for the body and soul. Chapter 730. Although a sudden birthday party had tricked Li Yundong from Tianan City to Haikao City, Li Yundong still stayed with the mentality of taking things as they came. He smiled and watched the crew celebrate Chow Kefi's birthday together. As the birthday girl, Chow Kefi wore a pointy hat in the crowd. There were still some cream cake stains on her face and body, but this still could not hide her amazing beauty. This coquettish woman smiled like a flower in the crowd. Even a blind man would be able to see again after seeing her. His eyes lit up. The party lasted for more than an hour in the room, before everyone calmed down a little. Some went to the spacious room to drink and have fun at the bar, while others gathered on the balcony to smoke and chat. Li Yundong stood alone in the corner with his back against the wall, quietly lost in thought. Suddenly, a woman's voice came from beside him. What are you doing here? Don't you drink? Li Yundong turned his head, and saw that Chow Kefi had changed into a new set of clothes. The cake stains on her head and chest had long been washed away. At this time, she was wearing a red cheongsam. Her slender snow-white legs were faintly discernible from the opening of the cheongsam. Her black hair was coiled high behind her head, revealing her full and bright forehead and slender snow-white neck. She looked like a proud and noble lady. Chow Kefi was holding two transparent goblets in her hands. Each goblet was filled with a third of red wine. It was crystal clear, like liquid gems and flowing agate. Chow Kefi had obviously drunk a little too much. She looked at Li Yundong with blurred eyes, and the corners of her mouth were gently pursed, forming a playful smile. Li Yundong looked at the wine in her hand, smiled slightly, and shook his head. I won't drink. Drinking alcohol is harmful to the liver. I advise you not to drink either. Chow Kefi giggled. She was obviously having a good time today. Her eyes were full of autumn waves as she smiled and said, Life is full of joy. Don't let the wine cup be empty to the moon. When I met you a few months ago, you were still a wine fairy. Now you actually say that you don't drink anymore. TSK, you are not honest. Li Yundong smiled and said, I had no choice. I had to drink at that time. Chow Kefi giggled and said, Yeah, you're quite protective of the fairer sex. I haven't thanked you properly last time. Maybe it was the alcohol that gave her courage. Chow Kefi leaned over to Li Yundong, a little drunk, and giggled. Hey, how can I thank you? You've helped me so much? Li Yundong quietly moved a little and said, Sister Chow, didn't you help me a lot? Aren't we friends? It's only natural. Li Yundong was standing next to a counter, just 2 fists away from it. As soon as he moved aside, he made room for a person. Chow Kefi thought that Li Yundong was making room for her, so she immediately stepped forward and got in. As the saying goes, beer goes to the belly, white wine goes to the head, and red wine goes to the legs. When Chow Kefi took a step forward, her body suddenly staggered as if she was about to fall. Li Yundong didn't expect that Chow Kefi would take advantage of the situation. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had to hold Chow Kefi with both hands and persuade her. Sister Chow, you drank too much. Chow Kefi giggled and said, I didn't drink too much. You drank too much. By the way, you won't get drunk no matter how much you drink. I can't compare to you. Li Yundong supported Chow Kefi and said softly, Sister Chow, let me take you back. Chow Kefi giggled and said, Go back? This is my room. Where should I go? Li Yundong saw that she was swaying, as if she would fall into his arms if he let go. So he said, I'll take you to my room to have a rest. Chow Kefi looked at Li Yundong with her charming eyes and giggled. Go to your room? Well, help me there. I'm going to drink with you all night. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and turned to look at the other people in the room. He saw that Lu Feier was chatting with Chris, but she glanced at him from time to time. Especially when she saw him supporting Chow Kefi, her eyes became more and more ambiguous and strange. In front of Li Yundong, there was a charming beauty who threw herself into his arms. It would be a lie if he didn't feel any emotions in his heart. People were not plants and trees. How could they be emotionless? Li Yundong was not a piece of wood. How could he not know what Chow Kefi meant to him? Moreover, in the past, Master Huifa, with his high cultivation, had almost set himself on fire in the face of the seduction of the mystical silver fox, let alone a strong Yuanyang boy like him. Li Yundong sighed in his heart and didn't dare to stay any longer. He supported Chow Kefi and walked to his room. Chow Kefi giggled as she walked. After entering the room, Chow Kefi gently struggled out of Li Yundong's hands and fell onto the bed. She giggled and said, I'm so happy today. I didn't expect you to really come. I thought you wouldn't come today. Li Yundong smiled and didn't answer her. He just took off her high heels and carried her to the bed. After washing a hot towel in the bathroom and wiping her face for her, he said softly, Sister Chow, sleep for a while. I'll go over first. Just as he was about to leave, Chow Kefi grabbed his hand and said with a pleading face, Don't go. Talk to me. It'll be okay in a while. Li Yundong hesitated for a moment, nodded, and sat by the bed. When Chow Kefi saw him sitting down, she immediately breathed a sigh of relief, as if she felt safer and calmer with this man by her side. She murmured in a low voice, You don't know. I've been exhausted these days. It's hard for me to have such a rest today. I haven't been so happy for a long time. You know, it's really tiring for a person like me to stay in this circle and refuse to be followed by others. When a man sees me, he thinks that I'm doing business by selling my body and wants to come up and take advantage of me. When a woman sees me, she thinks that I'm a prostitute, and her eyes are full of contempt. Chow Kefi let out a long sigh, and her eyes were full of resentment and grievance. Li Yundong saw it and sighed softly. Then why do you still do this? Chow Kefi raised her eyes slightly and smiled bitterly. Then what do I do? Which line of work will I not be misunderstood by others? Unless I'm really a prostitute. Chow Kefi exhaled softly, and her breath was as fragrant as orchids. At first, I just wanted to prove that I was not worse than others, so I worked hard. But I didn't expect that after such a long time in this line of work, I couldn't extricate myself. I couldn't figure out what else I could do in the future if I quit this line of work. Li Yundong smiled and said, Sister Chow, you are so smart and beautiful. What can't you do? Chow Kefi shook her head and said faintly, Beautiful? It's not a good thing to be too beautiful. Sometimes a woman is too beautiful, which is a kind of original sin. An ordinary man is innocent, but he will get into trouble because of his wealth. You've seen it before. Even a guy like Zhao Yuzhen wanted to take advantage of me, and I was almost killed by him. Fortunately, you're here." As she said this, Chao Kefi looked at Li Yundong with blurred eyes and said, "Tell me, are you my lucky star?" Li Yundong didn't say anything and smiled silently. At this moment, anything he said would be wrong. 1,000 words were not as good as a silence. Chao Kefi looked at Li Yundong faintly, as if she knew what he was thinking. She sighed and envied the girl named Su Chan in her heart. She also felt a little resentful at Li Yundong's unromantic avoidance, but more than that, she admired Li Yundong's persistence. The women around Li Yundong were very strange. The more infatuated he was with Su Chan, the more they admired him. The more they admired him, the more they loved him. It was as if they were stuck in a quagmire and couldn't get out. "Well, I won't embarrass you. Just accompany me and listen to what I have to say. Although Fair is a good person, there are some things that can't be said to her." Chao Kefi took Li Yundong's hand and murmured softly like a child. Throughout the night, she kept talking about her past until she fell into a deep sleep. Li Yundong saw that she had closed her eyes and was no longer talking. There was a soft snoring sound coming from her sinuses, and her body was lying on the bed. Because she was lying on her side, a deep ravine was squeezed out of her snow-white chest. This ravine was illuminated by the moonlight outside the window, and the shadows were really clear and layered. The exposed skin was as white as snow and as delicate as jade, enough to bury the lofty aspirations of any hero and martyr in the world. Chao Kefi's delicate red lips were slightly open, and she had a seductive posture that allowed him to taste her. Her eyebrows were filled with a soul-stirring charm. Although there was no gaze or seductive words, just the posture of her jade-like body was like a silent burning raging fire, burning people to the point that they wanted to turn into moths flying into the fire and pounce forward without any regard for their lives. The inferior seduction was nothing more than selling one's body, while the superior seduction was to move one's emotions, supplemented by looming temptation. If Chao Kefi had thrown herself into Li Yundong's arms as soon as she came up and seduced him, he would have left long ago. But she just begged in a low voice, wanting to talk to him. How could a man like Li Yundong, who had tender feelings for the fairer sex, have the heart to refuse? Li Yundong looked at Chao Kefi in front of the bed. He only felt as if there was a fire burning under his abdomen, teasing him. For a moment his mouth was a little dry, and his mind was buzzing. He stretched out his hand slightly, as if he wanted to touch Chao Kefi's body, which was as soft as water. At this time, if it had been another man, he would have died under the peony and become a ghost. But Li Yundong quickly calmed down. He took back his frozen hand in midair, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Then, he gently pulled out his other hand from her hand, stood up and slowly walked out. As soon as he went out, Li Yundong saw the door of Chao Kefi's room open. Lu Feier and Chris came out of the room with red faces. Although the two girls were about the same height, one had a black oval face, the other a golden oval face. One face was full of oriental classical charm, and the other was full of exotic charm. When put together, they were very eye-catching. Li Yundong could see at a glance that Lu Feier had obviously drunk too much, and her eyes were a little blurred. On the other hand, although Chris's snow-white cheeks were smeared with a trace of shame, her eyes were extremely bright. Li Yundong asked with a smile, "How much did you drink?" Chris opened her mouth and was about to speak, but Lu Feier rushed to say with a smile, "Not much. I drank 2 bottles. Chris is amazing. She drank 4 bottles. No man can compete with her." After drinking 2 bottles of wine, the aftereffects were not small. Lu Feier staggered and couldn't stand still, but she still shouted that she wanted to go out to play. Li Yundong looked at the two of them and thought to himself, "That's not right." According to reason, Chao Kefi should be possessed by the soul of the mystical silver fox now. Her internal organs should be very strong, so she shouldn't be drunk. Could it be that? It's not the wine that makes people drunk. Thinking of this, Li Yundong was silent for a while and sighed softly. In the room, Chao Kefi had also opened her black and bright eyes at this time. Her eyes were clear, and there was no sign of drunkenness. She looked at the ceiling quietly, as if she wanted to look straight at the sky through the reinforced concrete. After a long time, she let out a long sigh. Chow Kefi sat up gracefully and silently looked at the cold crescent moon outside the French window. Her eyes flickered with struggle, pain, infatuation, and confusion. However, these emotions were mixed together. After a long time, they slowly settled down, and another kind of cold gaze appeared in her eyes. The coquettish woman smiled coldly and said, "Wisdom King, good concentration, good concentration. Hey, you escaped with your life." Chapter 731. After that night, Li Yundong did not stay in the crew. He had wanted to say hello to Chow Kefi, Lu Feier, and the others early in the morning before returning to Tianan City. However, because many of them had been crazy too late last night, they were still sleeping when Li Yundong arrived early in the morning. Li Yundong had no choice but to return to Tianan City first. But as soon as he got home, he saw Ling Yu, the little fox, coming up to him with her mobile phone. She said in surprise, Leader, you're back? You called just now." It was very inconvenient for Li Yundong to go out with his young spirit body, so he had left his phone at home. Hearing Ling Yu's words, he took the phone and asked curiously, "Who's calling?" Ling Yu blinked her eyes. "I don't know. They didn't say anything. They just told you to call her back when you're back. It's a girl." Li Yundong smiled at her and asked, "Where's Su Chan? Still in the room? Your young martial uncle hasn't woken up yet?" Ling Yu shook her head. "No, Su Chan hasn't come out of her room yet." Li Yundong nodded and said to her with a smile, "Okay, I got it. Go and do your work." After watching Ling Yu leave, he turned on his phone and saw a number that had just called him. It was Feng Na's number. Feng Na, he thought to himself. Why is she looking for me? Could it be something that happened in the store? After Li Yundong dialed the number, he heard Feng Na sigh on the phone and say, "Boss Li, there's finally news from you. I thought you had already ascended to become a deity." Li Yundong chuckled. "What happened?" Feng Na could not help but say, "Hey, what are you talking about? Can't I look for you if there's nothing? You're really a hands-off shopkeeper. You don't care about this tea shop anymore? Shouldn't you at least show yourself?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Isn't it because of you, Manager Feng? Is there a need for me to take care of it?" Feng Na sighed. "But you have to come today, and you have to come right away." Li Yundong asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Feng Na said, "Chris's family is here. They are having tea in the tea house now." Li Yundong was shocked. "Huh? Her family is here? You found the tea house. What are you here for?" Feng Na's voice sounded a little helpless. "I'm here to look for Chris. I've already looked around the school, but you wouldn't answer my calls. So, I had no choice but to come here. I was shocked when I opened the shop this morning. Come quickly. I can't handle this matter." Li Yundong thought for a while and said, "Don't worry, you calm them down first. I'll call Chris first and ask Ziyuan to bring her back later. Then I'll go to the Desanxian tea shop and see what they say." After Li Yundong hung up the phone, he turned around and went into the room, telling Ziyuan about Chris. Ziyuan knew that Chris had contributed a lot to the auction of the Medicine King tripod, and her cultivation heart was quite devout. She also had a great opportunity. She was a good seedling that could only be cultivated. Although her family had come here to take her back, they still had to listen to Chris's opinion. They couldn't make decisions on their own. After Ziyuan picked him up, she immediately flew to Haikao. Wan Hongling originally had a lot to say to Li Yundong, but seeing that he was busy rushing to the Desanxian, she had no choice but to swallow her words. After Li Yundong had explained everything, he hurried to the Desanxian. When he arrived at the intersection of the pedestrian street, Li Yundong saw Cheng Cheng, who had been looking forward to it, standing on her tiptoes and waving at Li Yundong. She hurriedly caught up with him and complained, "Hero Li, you're too mysterious. It's so hard to find you." Li Yundong looked at her with a smile and said, "What? You didn't make up an excuse to trick me, did you?" Cheng Cheng punched Li Yundong on the shoulder and said angrily, "What are you trying to trick? You're so heartless. We've been busy running this tea house these days. Is it easy? From purchasing goods to inspecting goods, from management to service, we're all naked. How could you say such sarcastic words? I'm so angry. No, I want a raise. Li Yundong laughed. Suddenly his face turned serious and he said seriously, do you know what happened to Yao Jiesin? Cheng Cheng was stunned and didn't react. She said angrily, hey, you black-hearted capitalist, do you want to exploit and oppress us poor working people? Don't you know that asking for a raise is the normal right of working people? Li Yundong said seriously, I know, but it's a little miserable. Cheng Cheng looked at Li Yundong with her mouth agape and asked timidly, how miserable? Will I be fired? You won't be so cruel, will you? Li Yundong said with a smile, no, the death penalty will be carried out immediately. Only then did Cheng Cheng react. She laughed and punched Li Yundong again. You're so annoying. I didn't stab you 8 times. Li Yundong laughed and said, soon. Look at your resentful face. If you have a knife in your hand, do you think you can't stab me? Cheng Cheng pursed her lips and smiled. I wouldn't dare stab you. If I did, someone would fight me to the death. Besides, if I stabbed you, who would pay me? Li Yundong laughed and bickered with Cheng Cheng. Suddenly, he felt as if he had returned to school. He felt a little emotional. As he walked, he asked, by the way, how is the school now? No one wants to expel me, right? Cheng Cheng said curiously, didn't you go through the procedures of suspension? Who would be so stupid as to expel the most famous student of Tiannan University? Hey, you don't know, but you are now the role model of our school. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He thought to himself, role model? Learning how to fight and PK people all day long. Cheng Cheng saw that Li Yundong didn't believe her, so she explained anxiously, you have to believe me. Now the student union is promoting you everywhere as a model for college students to start their own business. Your picture has been hanging on the publicity window of the school for more than a month. Li Yundong laughed. Don't be ridiculous. Feng Na is no longer the president of the student union, is she? Yanhua should have been promoted, right? He hates me very much. How could he do the publicity for me? Cheng Cheng smiled proudly and said, this is the last thing Nana did after she quit the student union. You really should have seen the expression on Yanhua's face at that time. It was wonderful. I suspect that he wouldn't have that kind of expression, even if he ate a raw mouse. Li Yundong smiled and talked with Cheng Cheng as they walked. Soon they arrived at the door of Desanxian. Li Yundong turned his head and saw that the door of Zhao's tea house was closed. General Tai was guarding the door. Obviously, it was closed for business. He couldn't help but be stunned and asked curiously, when did Zhao Yogan's shop close? Cheng Cheng thought for a moment and said, it seems to have been a while ago. I don't remember. It seems to have been a few days. What Li Yundong didn't know was that Zhao Yogan's soul had already left his body, and he had died a long time ago. His property had almost been swept away by his 2 little sweethearts. When his family found that he was missing and his sweethearts had run away with his property, they immediately called the police. Zhao Yujin had been mean and selfish when he was alive. Once he died, his family naturally wouldn't be polite. In order to compete for his remaining property, they fought fiercely. All his real estate had been stopped for a long time and had entered the property evaluation stage. As one of his real estate, this tea house had naturally been closed long ago. Li Yundong thought for a while, but he couldn't figure out what was going on. So he didn't dwell on this issue. He smiled and said, well, one less competitor, and the pressure will be less. How is business recently? Just as Cheng Cheng was about to speak, she saw a man walking out of the door of Desanxian. He said unhurriedly, even if your tea house has no competitors, it will go out of business sooner or later. There was nothing more annoying than saying such unlucky words in front of a business shop. Li Yundong was secretly unhappy, but he didn't show it on his face. He turned his head and saw a man in a suit and leather shoes standing in front of him. The man was about 1.74 meters tall, with black hair and an Asian face. He looked quite delicate, with a pair of gentle gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose. His hair was combed straight, and the leather shoes on his feet were shining like a mirror. The man stood on the steps and looked down at Li Yundong. Although his face was calm, his eyes were full of aristocratic superiority and contempt. Li Yundong thought for a moment and asked, "You are?" At this time Feng Na, who had been waiting at the door, rushed over and quickly introduced, "Li Yundong, this is Chris's." Before she could finish her words, another big man rushed out of the store. He was a typical American football quarterback. He was tall and burly, with unkempt blonde hair, deep eyes and a high nose. The outline of his face was somewhat similar to Chris's. When the man saw Li Yundong, he immediately looked at Feng Na and Cheng Cheng. At this time, several little foxes on duty in the Desanxian store were also cheering and running toward Li Yundong. He immediately understood and shouted at Li Yundong with saliva flying everywhere. Li Yundong's English was very poor, and the man spoke very fast. How could he know what he was saying? He could only quietly avoid the man's saliva, then turned to Feng Na and said, "What did this guy say?" Feng Na looked at Li Yundong with some worry and whispered, "He said that he is Chris's brother. Just now, he asked you why you kidnapped Chris to this poor and backward place. Did you seduce her? He wants to sue you to the local government and the court, and..." No matter how good-tempered Li Yundong was, he couldn't help but frown and say in a deep voice, "And what?" Feng Na hesitated for a moment and didn't say anything. Instead, the young Asian man next to her sneered and said in non-standard Chinese, "Besides, your shabby tea shop looks like it's going to close down at any time. If you tell us Chris's whereabouts immediately and promise not to interfere in this matter, maybe we'll buy your tea shop and let you have a way out. What do you think?" At this time, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Buy, let me have a way out." In Li Yundong's opinion, there was nothing more ridiculous than this. In the world, he was the only one who didn't want to give people a way out. Who would dare to say such words to him? Chapter 732. Americans and Chinese people did not understand each other's languages. Li Yundong's English was very poor, and this foreigner, who claimed to be Chris's brother, also did not understand it. If the two of them talked to each other, they would really be like chickens talking to ducks, staring at each other. Soon, but in this world, in addition to language, laughter was interlinked. Whether it was a joyful laugh, a happy laugh, or a cold laugh, people could understand its meaning without translation. What was most unbearable and obvious was the laughter that was filled with mockery and ridicule. Although Chris's brother didn't know what the Asian man beside him had said to Li Yundong, Li Yundong's laughter really made him unhappy. His sister left a letter home and went to a distant country. It was reasonable to say that Westerners advocated independence and freedom, so they had no control over where his sister went. However, his sister had only left a copy of the letter for her grandmother. The others were completely in the dark. If they hadn't found out that they hadn't seen Chris for a long time and asked Lin Guaying, they wouldn't have known where Chris had gone. This matter made Chris's strict parents very angry. They couldn't imagine why such a good girl like Chris would put down her studies and go to a distant country like a psycho, especially in the eyes of Chris's brother. Since the last time Chris came back from China, she seemed to have become a different person. For God's sake, she had become like an Oriental wearing a Western skin. She kept mentioning Confucius, Mencius, and Zhuang to him. Damn it! Do these ghosts who have been dead for more than 2,000 years have such great charm? When Chris's brother heard Li Yundong's laughter, he stared at him with a pair of bell-like eyes and shouted, "What are you laughing at? What's so funny? Where is Chris?" Li Yundong understood this sentence. He glanced at the quarterback in front of him faintly, turned his head, and said to the Asian man beside him who had spoken wildly, "Shouldn't you introduce yourselves first?" The Asian man pushed his glasses up and said in a reserved and arrogant manner, "My name is Han Zhen, Chris's fiancé. This is Chris's brother Jim." Compared to Crazy's brother Jim, the one who was even more upset was Han Zhen, who was standing next to him. Chris was a famous socialite at Pennsylvania State University. There was no one who didn't know her. It was impossible for a beautiful girl like her to have no suitors. Han Zhen in front of him was not only the one who pursued her the most fiercely, But his family and Crazy's family were also on good terms. When Crazy's family settled in Harrisburg, they once led the Chinese to fight against the local gangsters in the United States. The important allies of Crazy's family were this Asian man's grandfather's family. Almost there, after the two families gained a foothold, Chris's family slowly turned to light industry, while the Asian man's family chose to run a business in the underworld. However, Han Jun's father had been involved in the underworld business for a long time, and he always felt that he would run into ghosts if he walked too much at night, so he always wanted to clear his name. As a result, he naturally turned his attention to Han Jun's close family friend. The old man of the Han family urged his son to work hard to pursue Crazy. Even without his father's urging, Han Jun was also an admirer of Crazy and had pursued her since a long time ago. But when he was pursuing her fiercely, he found that Crazy had suddenly disappeared. After Han Jun used his power to find out where Crazy had gone, he suddenly flew into a rage. He firmly believed that this bastard named Li Yundong was competing with him for a woman, so he immediately wanted to rush to Tian'an City to denounce him. But Han Jun was a smart man. He knew that even if he came, he would not be recognized and might be hated by Chris, so he dragged Jim along. Looking at Jim's figure, one could tell that he was a single-celled animal with 4 limbs and a simple mind. After being slightly urged by Han Jun, he immediately rushed to Tian'an City angrily. As the saying goes, a dragon has 9 sons, and each son is different. Contrary to Crazy's low-key and reserved character, her brother was a typical Western playboy. He was domineering and arrogant. If it weren't for the fact that he was in the territory of his country, he would have beaten Li Yundong at first sight. Although Li Yundong's cultivation was only in the Yangshan phase for the time being, he was still a famous cultivator in the world. Naturally, he couldn't argue with these 2 ignorant guys. Otherwise, people might laugh at him for bullying the weak. Li Yundong glanced at the 2 of them and walked into the hall of the tea house. He said lightly, "Crazy will come over later. If you have anything to say, you can tell her. If she wants to go with you, I won't stop her." Logically speaking, these words were reasonable. However, when Han Jun heard them, he did not feel good, because he had sent Crazy a lot of text messages and made a lot of phone calls before. On the one hand, he wanted to find out where she was going, and on the other hand, he wanted to persuade her to come back. However, Crazy didn't reply to his text messages or answer his phone calls at all. Han Jun was sure that Crazy was hiding from him. Going to the country was just an excuse. Maybe someone there had made her lose her mind for a while and made her fall in love with him. Especially when Han Jun saw Li Yundong for the first time, he was even more shocked by his temperament. He came from a big family. Although he had seen many outstanding peers, he had never seen a young man as handsome and elegant as Li Yundong. Therefore, Han Jun immediately concluded that it was reasonable for Crazy to fall in love with this countryman in front of him. It was also because of this that even Han Jun himself didn't realize that in his subconscious, a demon called inferiority complex was gnawing at his soul and heart, making him more and more jealous of this countryman named Li Yundong. Han Jun was sure that even if Li Yundong asked Crazy to come, she wouldn't go back with them. Unless this countryman in front of him asked her to go back, Crazy would probably go with them obediently. Therefore, Han Jun stared at Li Yundong coldly and didn't take what he had said to heart at all. He just said, "You might as well think about what I said just now. If you are willing to persuade Crazy to go back with us, I can consider buying your tea house and paying twice the price. How about that?" Li Yundong didn't even think about it and immediately said flatly, "No." Han Jun didn't take it seriously. He sneered and followed behind him to look at the tea house. Although his voice was still calm, there was always a hint of sarcasm and contempt in his tone. He said, "Looking at the location of your tea house, and according to the country's real estate and market policies, I can infer that your tea house should be rented. Therefore, you are at best a rented and renovated shop. Looking at the effect of your renovation, it will cost you at most about 400,000 yuan. According to your other operating costs, Your tea house is worth 700,000 yuan at most. I'll double it for you. 4 million yuan. Sell it to me, and help me persuade Crazy to go back. How about that? 4 million yuan? The little foxes of the Fox Zen school looked at each other. And then one of them immediately said, "Wow, that's a lot of money. Will the leader sell it? If he sells it, he'll be rich." "Idiot, what will we eat if you sell it? How can you be so stupid as to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs? You're so stupid." "That's right. However, our tea house has not been doing very well." "Idiot, shut up. Aren't you afraid that the leader will be angry?" At this time, Li Yundong was no longer angry. He quietly listened to Han Zhen's chatter. He sat down at the tea table very calmly and smiled at the little foxes beside him. "What are you waiting for? Why don't you make me tea?" The little foxes seemed to wake up from a dream and went to make tea. Feng Na and Cheng Cheng stood to one side with worried faces. Li Yundong glanced at them and said with a smile, "Why are you standing there? Sit down, sit down." Feng Na and Cheng Cheng looked at each other, then secretly glanced at Han Zhen and Jim, who had ugly expressions on their faces. They then carefully sat down next to Li Yundong. Li Yundong asked with a smile, "How's the business of the tea house recently?" Feng Na hesitated for a moment, as if thinking about how to phrase her words, but Han Zhen sneered and said, "Do you still need to look at the business of your tea house? If it were a shop on the street, it would be fine, but it is in the depths of the pedestrian street, and there is no good parking lot around. Why would anyone come here to drink tea? If you continue to run your tea house like this, it will go out of business sooner or later. Why don't you think about the offer I gave you?" Li Yundong turned his face and looked at him strangely. "How do you know that if my tea house continues to operate like this, it will go out of business sooner or later?" Han Zhen sneered and said, "I've been waiting here for nearly 2 hours, but I haven't seen a single customer come in. Can your business be considered good? Besides, although China is the birthplace of tea culture, there are very few people who come to tea houses to drink tea. A tea house needs to do more catering business in order to survive, or it needs to have its own unique connections. Otherwise, it will definitely not be able to survive." Han Zhen looked Li Yundong up and down and said, "Looking at how young you are, I don't think you have any connections in the upper class, so it's only a matter of time before your tea house goes out of business." In all fairness, Li Yundong knew that Han Zhen's words were very realistic. If he was really an ordinary college student, opening such a tea house here would definitely be courting death. It would be strange if the business did not suffer losses in outer space. But the problem was Li Yundong an ordinary college student? Hearing Han Zhen's words, Li Yundong smiled slightly and didn't say anything more. He just looked Han Zhen up and down and smiled without saying anything. Seeing Li Yundong's reaction, Han Zhen was even more unhappy. He wanted to say something, but he saw that Li Yundong was ignoring him at all. What he had said just now was like playing the lute to a cow. Han Zhen secretly gritted his teeth and suppressed his anger. He slowly sat down at the table opposite Li Yundong and said in a cold voice, "Miss, please pour some tea." The little foxes saw that this guy was very rude to their sect leader, so they didn't have any good expressions on their faces. A cute little fox held a teapot in front of him and snorted, "Pour it yourself." Han Zhen was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. But he was also a shrewd person. He forcibly suppressed his anger and pulled Jim, who was about to make a fuss, to sit down and wait quietly to the side. After waiting for nearly 2 hours, it was almost noon. Li Yundong looked at the time and said to Cheng Cheng, "How do you solve your meals?" Cheng Cheng said, "Order takeout." Li Yundong nodded and said to Cheng Cheng with a smile, "Well, go out and buy it." Cheng Cheng answered and trotted out of the door. She was immediately delighted and said to Li Yundong, "Chris is here." Although Jim didn't understand, he could still understand the words Chris. He immediately stood up. Han Zhen was also delighted. He also stood up and wanted to go out to greet her. But when he moved, he saw that Li Yundong was calmly drinking tea beside him, as if there was no one else around. He immediately stopped and slowly sat down again, as if he wanted to compete with Li Yundong in terms of bearing all the time. Jim didn't care so much. He quickly walked out and saw Chris rushing over. He didn't even have time to look at Zi Yuan, who was next to him, and shouted at Chris. Chris was also a very assertive person. She raised her eyebrows and stood at the door of Desanxian, talking loudly with her brother in English. Zi Yuan, who had followed them, glanced at them and entered the tea house. She glanced around and walked toward Li Yundong with a smile. At first, Han Zhen was still drinking tea calmly, but when he glanced around and saw Zi Yuan, he was so shocked that he didn't even notice that the tea in the teacup had been poured on his body. He shouted crazily in his heart, "How could there be such a beautiful woman?" Especially when he saw this fairy, who was like a fairy descending to the world, walking toward Li Yundong and smiling at him like a flower. A surge of jealousy almost burned him to ashes. What's so great about this guy? Not only did he win Chris's favor, but he also has such a fairy by his side. Zi Yuan didn't know that Han Zhen was so jealous. She smiled and said to Li Yundong, "How is the tea house's business?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It doesn't seem to be very good." Zi Yuan smiled gently and comforted him. "It's okay. Business will get better. I saw that the tea house of Zhao across the street has closed, which means that we have one less competitor." Li Yundong chuckled. Before he could say anything, he suddenly saw Jim waving his arm, pointing at himself, and then the tea house, roaring loudly. Li Yundong frowned secretly and asked Feng Na in a low voice, "What did they say?" Feng Na hesitated for a moment and said, "Jim said that our tea house is a joke and a pile of shit. If Chris doesn't go back with him, he will buy the tea house across the street along with this shit like Desanxian, and let you have a taste of living on the streets and having nothing." Li Yundong didn't get angry. Instead he laughed and said, "Nothing? Living on the streets? I've tasted it. I don't need his service. Tell him that not only will I not sell this tea house, but I will also open it all over the world in the future." As soon as he said this, not only was Feng Na tongue-tied, but her eyes were full of disbelief. Even the little foxes shook their heads secretly, not believing Li Yundong's words. Han Zhen was even more stimulated by Li Yundong's arrogant words, and couldn't help laughing wildly, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. "Your broken tea house can open all over the world? I'm dying of laughter." "If you can open it all over the world, I will be the President of the United States." Chapter 733. Han Zhen's words were so arrogant that Chris, who was at the door, looked at him. When Chris saw him, she frowned and walked in quickly, shouting, "Why are you here?" Although Han Zhen was shocked by Zi Yuan's beauty, he was more interested in Chris's family background. If he could marry Chris, it would be a great benefit to his family. Because of this, Han Zhen immediately put away the arrogant smile on his face and returned to his usual gentle face. He smiled slightly and said to Chris in English, "Chris, why did you come here without saying hello?" Chris had been ignored by Li Yundong a few days ago. Although she had been very happy with Lu Feier and the others, she had been very tired. She had thought that she had come to China to learn cultivation, but she had accidentally ended up shooting a TV series. In particular, Li Yundong's words had made her rush from Haikou to Tianan City, more than 1,000 kilometers back and forth. Even a clay figurine would be a little angry if she were to be bossed around like this. However, Chris didn't dare to vent her anger on Li Yundong, so she vented all her anger on Han Zhen. Chris had never liked Han Zhen, who had a gangster background. After hearing his words, she frowned and said to him in Chinese, "Who are you to me? Why should I say hello to you? Do I need to tell you where I'm going?" This sentence almost made Han Zhen choke. He choked for a moment, and a flash of anger flashed in his eyes, but he quickly recovered. He chuckled. Seeing that Chris was speaking to him in Chinese, he also said in Chinese, "Chris, I just care about you, especially your family. They care about you even more. Your brother Jim is concerned about your safety, so he specially invited me here to find you." Although Chris felt that she was being suppressed by Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin in terms of beauty, temperament and cunning. She was still a first-class woman in front of others. She glanced at her brother and immediately sneered. Han, don't use my brother as a shield. Don't I know what kind of character he is? If you hadn't instigated him, would he have come here? Hanjun frowned and looked at Jim for help. Although Jim didn't know what they were talking about, he was not an idiot. Looking at their expressions, he knew that Chris had embarrassed Hanjun. He immediately said, Chris, why are you helping an outsider? Don't you know that father has already agreed to your engagement with Han? Chris was so shocked that her eyes immediately widened. She subconsciously used her mother tongue and said, What? Me? He Han. Hell, who agreed? Why am I the last person to know about my marriage? The more Chris thought about it, the angrier she became. She furrowed her brows and glared at Hanjun. Are you the one behind this? Hanjun sighed and said to Chris with sincerity, Chris, I really love you. As he spoke, he glanced at Li Yundong, who was drinking tea leisurely, and said with ulterior motives, You're different from some people. Chris said angrily, He's my master. Be more polite when you speak. Hanjun frowned and glanced at Li Yundong disdainfully. Master? What did you learn from him? Chris was stunned when she heard this. After getting along with Li Yundong and other cultivators these days, she also found that cultivators like Li Yundong usually kept a low profile and didn't want others to know their true identities. She couldn't say in front of Hanjun that she had come to China to learn cultivation, so she could only bite the bullet and say, What I learned has nothing to do with you. Hanjun was stabbed by her again, so he had no choice but to continue asking Jim for help. At this time Jim said, Chris, our family misses you very much, and so does Grandma. She asked me to find you and take you back. Do you have the heart to leave us in such an ignorant and backward place? Did this man use some magic to enchant your soul? If Jim had been reasonable, he might have been able to persuade Chris, but he had mentioned Lin Guoying. This made Chris instantly think of what Lin Guoying had once said to her. Chris immediately understood that her grandmother would miss her. But when she had said that she wanted to come to China to be apprenticed to a master for cultivation, her grandmother had not only not stopped her, but had also greatly encouraged and praised her. Chris thought quickly and instantly concluded that Jim must have faked the imperial edict, using her feelings for Li Yundong to coax her to go back. She immediately sneered and said, Jim, first of all, Grandma agreed that I came to China. Secondly, this is not an ignorant and backward place. On the contrary, it is a magical and charming country, with a profound culture of 5,000 years. I like this culture, and it is the charm of this culture that has fascinated me. When Jim saw his sister talking back to him in public, he felt a little embarrassed. However, Chris was usually very doted on by her parents, and she was fair and modest. She had a lot of prestige in the family, and he listened to his sister's words in many things. He was angry, but he didn't dare to do it to Chris. He could only turn the gun and fire at Li Yundong. He shouted angrily, Hey, you yellow monkey, if you don't persuade Chris to go back, I'll break your bones. His words also scolded Hanjun. The corners of Hanjun's eyes twitched when he heard this, but he couldn't make a sound. Li Yundong saw that he was shouting at him in a stern voice. Obviously, he was not saying anything nice. He took a sip of tea unhurriedly and said to Feng Na, What is he talking about? Feng Na was not willing to translate these words to Li Yundong. She had seen Li Yundong fight at school many times. She knew that if she translated these words, there would be a full-scale fight here. She was not worried that Li Yundong would be at a disadvantage in a fight. In her opinion, Li Yundong was a living immortal. She was only afraid that if someone rushed here with their underwear on, Li Yundong could also beat them until they wore their underwear inside out and rushed back dejectedly. But if they really fought, these two were foreigners. In China, it would be a trivial matter if you beat a Chinese person. But if you beat a foreigner, it would be a big trouble. If they investigated, it would alarm the foreign consulates. Feng Na's hesitation made Han Jun, who was beside her, keenly aware of her timidity. He sneered and said to Li Yundong in Chinese, I don't care if you are Chris's master or who you are. Anyway, you can't have anything to do with her anymore. Otherwise, I will definitely make you suffer. Li Yundong was amused. He held the teacup and drank the tea while looking up at him. He was like a lion lazily looking at a dog barking at him. Oh, why do you want me to suffer the consequences? Han Jun gritted his teeth and was about to say something harsh when he saw Cheng Cheng suddenly rush in with 2 plastic bags filled with fast food. She shouted at Li Yundong from afar with a surprised face. Hey Li Yundong, there are a lot of Japanese people outside asking about you. What did you do? Did you blow up the Yasukuni shrine? Her words stunned everyone in the hall except Jim. The little foxes were naturally lively, so they hurriedly ran to the door and looked around. Sure enough, they saw many people holding colorful flags of tourist groups printed with Japanese characters walking along the street. One of them was bending down to ask passers-by about something. At this time, he happened to raise his head and look at Desanxian. When the little foxes met his eyes, they immediately shrank their heads in fright and chattered to Li Yundong. Leader, it's not good. The Japanese are here again. Li Yundong glared at them with a straight face and said in a deep voice, What are you panicking about? I'm here. Seeing that he was sitting as still as a mountain, the little foxes were relieved and stayed obediently by his side. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, said in a low voice, Li Yundong, this is a busy city. You should control yourself and don't get into a conflict with them. If you really can't do it, let me do it. Li Yundong chuckled and said noncommittally, These guys don't keep their word. I just beat them away, but they came back shamelessly. Hey, are they tired of living? As the two of them spoke in low voices, Han Jun and Jim looked at each other. They didn't know what was going on, so they had to sit aside patiently and wait to see what would happen. Li Yundong sat at the tea table in the middle of the hall, staring at the door with a sneer on his face. It seemed that he wanted to see which familiar face would appear in front of him in a while. The cultivation world of China and Japan was separated by a strip of water. Many Japanese cultivators were proficient in Chinese, and there were also many Chinese cultivators who were proficient in Japanese. Zi Yuan didn't speak English, but she was proficient in Japanese. When she saw the flag, her expression suddenly became strange, as if she wanted to laugh. She quickly glanced at Li Yundong, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. She held back her laughter and wanted to see his reaction. When Li Yundong saw such a group of people, he was also stunned. He looked at the clothes of this group of people. It was really the style of the movie Men in Black. They were black from head to toe, and these people were all sturdy. Tattoos could be seen on the exposed skin of their clothes and necks, as if they were a group of gangsters traveling. Li Yundong's expression was strange, and he couldn't help looking at this group of people. This group of people also glanced at the plaque of the tea house in unison, and then at the shop in unison. One of them had a ferocious face, and at first glance, it was obvious that he was not a good person. He said loudly in strange Chinese, Excuse me, is this Li Yundong's tea house? Feng Na and Cheng Cheng, who were standing to one side, saw that this group of people did not seem to be good people at all. The murderous aura of this group of people was extremely strong, and it was the style of gangsters. The two of them were so scared that their faces turned pale. They thought that the gangsters had come to seek revenge. Feng Na involuntarily tugged at Li Yundong's sleeve and said nervously in a low voice, Li Yundong, don't agree with him. Leave this to me. Hurry up and leave. Li Yundong looked at her, and his heart skipped a beat. His eyes also softened a little. He chuckled and said, Don't worry, these people are nothing to me. Although his voice was low, Han Jun, who was next to him, heard it clearly. He immediately sneered disdainfully. Li Yundong ignored him and raised his voice to the Japanese people outside. I am Li Yundong. What do you want? The man who had spoken was suddenly stunned, and his eyes lit up. Are you Li Yundong? Li Yundong stood up. Although there was a faint smile on his face, he was already secretly vigilant. As long as the other party had any evil intentions, he would immediately attack first. Li Yundong put his hands behind his back and said, Yes, I am Li Yundong. What do you want? The man in the lead immediately took 2 steps forward with an aggressive posture. The little foxes on the side were all shocked, and subconsciously stopped in front of Li Yundong. But as soon as they moved, they saw this fierce-looking guy's momentum was like a rainbow, and his momentum was astonishing. He knelt down on the ground. The fierce-looking guy banged his head 3 times and shouted loudly in Japanese. Then, the group of men in black behind him repeated this sentence and knelt down in unison. For a moment, a large number of people were kneeling in front of the Desanxian. For a moment, everyone inside and outside the Desanxian was stunned. Han Jun and Jim, who had wanted to see Li Yundong make a fool of himself, almost dropped their jaws to the ground. The hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Li Yundong was also dumbfounded. What's going on? What's wrong with these Japanese people? Could it be that the battle at Mount Longhu had made them lose their minds? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.